The young marketing director made me fetch her coffee, calling me the old intern in front of clients. She'd assign me bathroom cleaning duties while her actual assistants got promotions. At the quarterly meeting, she announced I was being restructured out. I stood up, walked to the projector, and showed everyone what I'd really been working on. "Lillian, would you mind grabbing me a latte? Make sure it's oat milk. I'm lactose intolerant." Brooklyn's voice carried across the conference room like nails on a chalkboard, interrupting the client presentation I'd been developing for 3 weeks. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward me, including those of our biggest pharmaceutical client, as she gestured dismissively in my direction. "Our intern here doesn't mind helping out." The word intern hit me like a physical slap. I'd been in marketing for 23 years, had launched campaigns that generated millions in revenue, and held certifications Brooklyn probably couldn't even pronounce. Yet here I sat, being introduced to clients as office help while she took credit for strategies I'd crafted from scratch. "Of course," I managed, my voice steady despite the humiliation burning in my chest. The client, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. I could feel her confusion radiating across the polished conference table as I stood to leave the room where I should have been presenting my own work. "Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing these stories that matter. If you believe that age and experience deserve respect in the workplace, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more women who need to hear this. Now let's see how this unfolds." This wasn't the first time, and deep down I knew it wouldn't be the last. The coffee shop downstairs buzzed with the usual morning crowd, and I found myself standing in line, wondering how I'd gotten here. 3 months ago, I'd walked into Morrison & Associates with my head held high, excited to bring my expertise to a growing firm. The hiring manager, Janet, had been thrilled with my portfolio. "Your experience with integrated campaigns is exactly what we need," she'd said, shaking my hand warmly. "Brooklyn will be lucky to have someone like you on her team." Lucky. The irony wasn't lost on me now as I ordered Brooklyn's complicated latte, watching the barista roll her eyes at the specific instructions I'd been given. When I returned to the conference room, Brooklyn was already deep into my presentation, the one I'd stayed late perfecting, complete with market research I'd gathered personally. She didn't even glance my way as I set her coffee down, too busy explaining her innovative approach to targeting demographics. "Brilliant work, Brooklyn," the client said, nodding approvingly. "Your insights into the 50-plus market are particularly impressive." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted copper. Those insights came from my own experience, my own demographic research, my own understanding of what motivated women like me. Brooklyn had simply copied and pasted my analysis into her slide deck, adding her name to the header. The pattern emerged slowly, like a photograph developing in a darkroom. First came the coffee runs. Always during important meetings, always with complicated orders that took just long enough to make me miss crucial discussions. Then the introductions began changing. In week 1, I was Lillian, our new marketing specialist. By week 3, I'd become Lillian, who helps us out with various projects. By month 2, I was simply our intern. The bathroom incident happened on a Tuesday that started like any other. I was reviewing campaign metrics when Brooklyn appeared at my desk, her signature fake smile plastered across her face. "Lillian, the executive restroom needs attention. The cleaning crew missed it yesterday." She placed a basket of supplies next to my keyboard with deliberate care. "You've got experience cleaning up messes, right?" The implication hung in the air like smoke. Around us, conversations stopped. Sarah, one of Brooklyn's assistants, suddenly became very interested in her computer screen. Marcus from the creative team cleared his throat and walked away quickly. Everyone knew what was happening, but no one dared intervene. I stared at the basket, rubber gloves, disinfectant, toilet bowl cleaner, and felt something crack inside my chest. This wasn't about cleanliness or helping out. This was about power, about putting me in my place, about making sure everyone knew exactly where I stood in Brooklyn's hierarchy. "Of course," I said again, the same phrase that had become my default response to her increasingly ridiculous demands. But this time as I picked up the basket I made a mental note. Date, time, witnesses present. This was going too far, and somewhere in the back of my mind a plan began forming. The bathroom was pristine. Clearly the cleaning crew hadn't missed anything. As I knelt on the cold tile floor, scrubbing toilets that didn't need scrubbing, I thought about my daughter. Jessica worked as a software engineer in Seattle, commanding respect from colleagues half her age. What would she think if she could see me now? The woman who'd raised her to never let anyone diminish her worth was literally on her knees in an office bathroom, cleaning up messes that didn't exist. When I returned to my desk 40 minutes later, Brooklyn was holding court near the water cooler, regaling her assistants with stories about social media trends. Some people just can't adapt, she was saying loud enough for me to hear. They're stuck in the past thinking newspaper ads and radio spots still matter. It's actually kind of sad. Her assistant Emma giggled nervously. But experience counts for something, right? Brooklyn's laugh was sharp, cutting. Experience with outdated methods isn't really experience at all. It's more like institutional memory. Nice to have around for context, but not particularly useful for actual strategy. I settled back into my chair, my hands still smelling faintly of disinfectant despite thorough washing. Institutional memory. That's what 23 years of successful campaigns had been reduced to in Brooklyn's world. I opened my laptop and began typing. Not campaign copy or market analysis, but something else entirely. A document I titled Timeline of Events. Date, time, incident, witnesses present. The supply closet assignment came 3 weeks later, perfectly timed to coincide with the quarterly strategy session I'd been preparing for months. Brooklyn appeared at my desk with another fake smile, this one even more transparent than usual. Lillian, I need you to organize the supply closet today. It's a disaster and we have executives coming through next week. She paused, tilting her head with mock concern. I know you were planning to sit in on the strategy meeting, but honestly your time is better spent on practical tasks. The meeting will be pretty technical. Lots of digital analytics and platform optimization. Probably over your head anyway. The words hit like physical blows, each one carefully chosen to wound. Behind Brooklyn, I could see the conference room where my colleagues were gathering for the meeting I'd helped plan. Charts and graphs I'd created covered the walls. Strategies I'd developed filled the agenda. And I was being sent to organize office supplies like a receptionist from 1985. What about the Morrison account presentation? I asked, trying to keep my voice level. I've been developing that campaign for 6 weeks. Brooklyn's smile widened. Oh, don't worry about that. Emma pulled together some fresh ideas yesterday. Much more contemporary approach. You understand. I understood perfectly. Emma, fresh out of college with a marketing degree and zero real-world experience, had probably spent an hour repackaging my work with trendier language and brighter colors. She'd get the credit, the presentation, and probably the promotion that should have been mine. That night, I sat in my car in the parking lot for 47 minutes, watching Brooklyn's BMW disappear into traffic. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white, and for the first time in months, I let myself feel the full weight of what was happening to me. This wasn't just workplace politics or personality conflicts. This was systematic, deliberate, and designed to push me out. Through my windshield, I could see lights still on in the building, probably the cleaning crew finishing their work. The real cleaning crew, the one that actually kept the office spotless without being asked to humiliate fellow employees. I thought about calling Jessica, about pouring out my frustrations to someone who would understand. But what would I say? That I was being treated like an intern despite 2 decades of experience? That I was cleaning bathrooms while someone half my age stole my work? The shame burned hotter than the anger because part of me wondered if Brooklyn was right. Maybe I was outdated, maybe my experience didn't matter in this new world of instant everything and algorithmic marketing. Maybe I should just accept the early retirement package that seemed inevitable, take my pension and fade quietly into irrelevance. But as I finally started my engine and pulled out of the parking lot, passing the building where my career was being systematically dismantled, I made a decision. Brooklyn wanted to play games with my professional reputation? She wanted to treat me like some relic from a bygone era? Fine. Let her underestimate exactly what this old intern was capable of. After all, she'd made one crucial mistake in her campaign against me. She'd assumed that someone with my experience hadn't learned a few things about strategy, documentation, and the art of war along the way. The next morning, I arrived at the office 30 minutes early, armed with a leather-bound notebook I'd picked up from the bookstore on my way home. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a few early birds like myself who preferred the quiet hours before the chaos began. I sat in my car for a moment, running my fingers over the smooth cover of what would become my secret weapon. Inside, I'd already written 3 entries from memory: the coffee incident, the bathroom assignment, and the supply closet humiliation. Each entry included the date, time, location, witnesses present, and Brooklyn's exact words when I could remember them. What surprised me was how easily the details came flooding back, as if my mind had been unconsciously cataloging every slight, every dismissive comment, every calculated insult. My first real break came during the Tuesday morning team meeting, when Brooklyn decided to share her thoughts about our new social media strategy. She was explaining something about authentic engagement when her phone buzzed with a text message. Without missing a beat, she glanced at it and smirked. "Speaking of authentic," she said, looking directly at me with that familiar cruel smile, "we need to make sure our content doesn't scream retirement home brochure. Our demographic research shows clients respond better to fresh, youthful perspectives. No offense, Lillian, but your generation's idea of cutting edge stopped somewhere around Facebook's early days." The room fell uncomfortably silent. Marcus shifted in his chair. Emma suddenly found her coffee cup fascinating. But I just smiled and nodded, my hand casually resting on my phone where the voice memo app was already recording. Brooklyn had no idea she'd just handed me golden evidence, complete with witnesses and a timestamp. "None taken," I replied calmly. Though I should mention I was actually developing integrated social campaigns when most of our team was still in middle school. Brooklyn's smile twitched, but she pressed on. "Experience with outdated platforms isn't really the same thing, though. We need people who understand TikTok psychology, Instagram algorithms, the whole ecosystem. It's probably best if you focus on more traditional tasks while we handle the digital innovation." I nodded again, still recording, still smiling. Each word was another nail in her professional coffin, though she was too arrogant to realize it. After the meeting, I transferred the audio file to my secure cloud storage and transcribed every word into my notebook. The pattern was becoming clearer with each documented incident. Brooklyn wasn't just being mean, she was systematically building a case for my irrelevance, creating a paper trail that would justify my eventual termination. But two could play that game. The breakthrough came 3 weeks later, when Sarah appeared at my desk after most of the office had cleared out for the day. She looked nervous, constantly glancing over her shoulder as if Brooklyn might materialize from the shadows. "Can I talk to you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the air conditioning. I minimized my computer screen. I'd been reviewing email threads where Brooklyn had reassigned my projects, and gave Sarah my full attention. At 26, she reminded me of my daughter, fresh-faced and idealistic, still believing that hard work and talent would naturally lead to success. "I need to tell you something," she continued, perching on the edge of my guest chair like she might need to make a quick escape. "About what Brooklyn said about you in the staff meeting last week." My pulse quickened, but I kept my expression neutral. "What kind of things?" Sarah's hands twisted in her lap. "She told us, me and Emma and the other assistants, that you were basically just filling time until you figured out your next step. She said not to give you anything important because you might, well, she said you might mess things up because you're not really focused on the job." The words hit harder than I'd expected, even though I'd suspected something like this was happening. Hearing it confirmed felt like a physical blow to my chest. "She also said," Sarah continued, her voice getting smaller, "that clients prefer working with younger faces, and that we should gradually take over your client interactions. She made it sound like it was for your own good, like she was protecting you from embarrassing situations." I reached for my notebook, hands steady despite the anger burning in my veins. "Sarah, would you be willing to write this down? Officially, I mean." She nodded quickly, relief flooding her features. "I've been feeling awful about it for weeks. It's not right what she's doing to you. You're one of the best people here and everyone knows it except her." As Sarah wrote her statement in careful, precise handwriting, I realized Brooklyn had made a crucial miscalculation. She'd assumed that younger employees would automatically side with her, that they'd see me as dead weight worth discarding. Instead, her treatment of me had made them uncomfortable, had awakened their sense of fairness and justice. Emma approached me 2 days later with her own story. Brooklyn had explicitly told her to keep Lillian busy with administrative tasks, while the real marketing work went to others. She'd even suggested that I was getting confused by new technology and needed simpler assignments to avoid mistakes. "I have the email where she wrote all this," Emma said, forwarding it to me immediately. "I saved it because something felt wrong about the whole thing." Reading Brooklyn's casual cruelty in black and white was both infuriating and vindicating. She'd been sloppy, leaving digital footprints everywhere, apparently believing that no one would ever challenge her authority or question her decisions. But the real goldmine came when I started reaching out to former employees. Finding Margaret took some detective work. She'd scrubbed her LinkedIn profile and wasn't listed in any company directories. I finally tracked her down through a mutual connection in the industry who remembered her fondly. "Margaret Chin," she said when I called. "Oh my goodness, I wondered what happened to her. She just disappeared one day. Very mysterious." When I finally reached Margaret herself, the conversation began tentatively but quickly turned emotional. She'd been with the company for nearly 20 years, a dedicated financial analyst who'd won multiple performance awards. Then Brooklyn arrived, and suddenly Margaret was making computational errors and showing resistance to new methodologies. "I kept wondering if I was losing my mind," Margaret said, her voice thick with remembered pain. "Everything I did was suddenly wrong. Every report needed revision. Every analysis was outdated. I started doubting myself, wondering if I really had become obsolete." She'd kept documentation too. Performance reviews that contradicted years of exemplary evaluations, emails where Brooklyn questioned her competence, meeting notes where her contributions were dismissed as traditional thinking. When I asked if she'd consider supporting a discrimination case, she was quiet for a long moment. "I thought I was the only one," she finally whispered. "I thought it was just me, that maybe I really wasn't good enough anymore." Paul's story was similar but more heartbreaking. A creative director with 15 years at the company, he'd watched his ideas get reassigned to younger team members while he was relegated to proofreading and file organization. Brooklyn had documented a pattern of creative stagnation and resistance to contemporary design trends that bore no resemblance to the innovative campaigns he'd been producing for over a decade. "She made me feel like a dinosaur," he said during our phone call. "Like everything I knew about design and branding was worthless. I started believing it myself." With their statements added to my growing file, I realized I wasn't dealing with isolated incidents of workplace bullying. This was systematic age discrimination, carefully orchestrated and meticulously documented by Brooklyn herself. She'd created a paper trail of manufactured incompetence to justify pushing out experienced employees. My final step was reaching out to Elizabeth Morrison, a lawyer who specialized in employment discrimination. Her receptionist scheduled a consultation for the following week, but Elizabeth called me personally that evening after reviewing the preliminary materials I'd sent. "This isn't just discrimination," she said without preamble. "This is systematic harassment designed to force older employees out of the company. How many others do you think there might be?" That question haunted me as I hung up the phone. How many others had Brooklyn driven away? How many experienced professionals had left believing they were truly inadequate, never realizing they'd been targeted for elimination? For the first time in months, I felt something I'd almost forgotten. Hope. Not just for justice but for vindication. Brooklyn's arrogance had been her downfall. She'd documented her own discrimination so thoroughly that building a case against her would be like connecting dots in a children's coloring book. The predator had become the prey, and she didn't even know it yet. The EOC office smelled like stale coffee and bureaucratic resignation. I sat in the waiting room, clutching my manila folder filled with months of carefully documented evidence, watching other people navigate their own workplace nightmares. A woman about my age sat across from me, her hands shaking as she filled out forms. A younger man paced near the window, muttering quietly into his phone about overtime violations. When my name was called, I followed a tired-looking caseworker down a hallway lined with motivational posters about workplace rights. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, filing a discrimination complaint while Brooklyn was probably back at the office, blissfully unaware that her world was about to implode. "Mrs. Patterson," the caseworker said, settling behind her desk with my file. "I've reviewed your preliminary submission. This appears to be a textbook case of age discrimination with a pattern of systematic harassment." Her words should have felt validating, but instead they made my stomach clench. This was really happening. I was crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed, filing an official complaint that would set forces in motion I couldn't control. "What happens next?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "We'll investigate, interview witnesses, review documentation. The process typically takes several months. He paused, studying my face. Are you prepared for potential retaliation? Employers sometimes escalate hostile behavior once they know a complaint has been filed. I almost laughed. Ma'am, the retaliation started months ago. At this point, I'm just making it official. That evening, Elizabeth Morrison called with an update on the parallel lawsuit we were preparing. Her voice carried the kind of controlled excitement that lawyers get when they know they have an airtight case. I've never seen documentation this thorough, she said. Brooklyn essentially built our case for us. But we need to discuss timing. When do you want to serve the papers? The question hung in the air while I considered my options. I could go quietly, settle privately, take whatever severance they offered and disappear into early retirement. That's what they expected, what they were counting on. Older employees were supposed to fade gracefully, not fight back publicly. I want maximum impact, I told her. Not just for me but for everyone she's driven out before. What did you have in mind? That's when inspiration struck. I'd been thinking about this all wrong, approaching it like a traditional legal matter when what I really needed was a marketing campaign. And I knew exactly the right venue for my product launch. The next day I cornered Sarah during her lunch break. She was sitting alone in the break room, scrolling through her phone while picking at a salad that looked more like punishment than food. Sarah, can I ask you something about company procedures? I said, sliding into the seat across from her. She looked up nervously, probably wondering if Brooklyn had sent me to spy on her. Sure, what's up? The quarterly meetings, they're pretty formal affairs, right? Leadership presentations, client updates, that sort of thing. Oh yeah, they're huge productions. Brooklyn always treats them like her personal TED Talk. Sarah rolled her eyes. She spends weeks preparing her presentation, making sure everything's perfect. The whole thing gets live-streamed to the satellite offices and recorded for the company archive. My heart started racing. Live-streamed to whom exactly? Everyone. All the regional managers, legal department, HR leadership, even some of our bigger clients who want to stay informed about company direction. She took a bite of lettuce, completely unaware she'd just handed me the keys to Brooklyn's professional destruction. Why do you ask? Just curious about company culture, I said casually. When's the next one? 3 weeks from Friday. Brooklyn's already in full preparation mode. You know how she gets. I certainly did know how she got. Obsessive, controlling, desperate to impress. She'd spend the next 3 weeks perfecting her presentation, polishing her image, making sure every detail reflected her vision of leadership excellence. She'd never suspect that someone she considered beneath notice was planning to hijack her moment of glory. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with Elizabeth's number in my phone and a calendar spread before me. The quarterly meeting was October 15th. If I filed the lawsuit on October 14th, I'd have the confirmation letter in hand by the next morning. Perfect timing for a little chantel. Elizabeth, it's Lillian. I know when I want to serve those papers. The next 2 weeks blurred together in a haze of preparation that would have impressed any military strategist. I practiced my presentation in front of my bathroom mirror, timing each slide transition, perfecting my tone of voice. The folder containing all my evidence was organized with surgical precision. Each document labeled, each statement arranged in chronological order, each piece of proof designed for maximum impact. My outfit required careful consideration. Too casual and I'd look unprofessional. Too formal and I'd seem like I was trying too hard. I settled on the navy blazer I'd worn when I won the Industry Achievement Award 5 years ago. Professional, confident, memorable. The kind of outfit that commanded attention and respect. But the real masterstroke came from an unexpected source. While researching our client list for potential witnesses, I discovered that one of our biggest accounts was Silverbridge Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to senior citizens' rights and age discrimination advocacy. They'd been with the company for 3 years, representing nearly $800,000 in annual revenue. The irony was delicious. Brooklyn had been systematically discriminating against older employees while taking money from an organization dedicated to protecting exactly those people. I wondered if anyone else had noticed this contradiction, or if Brooklyn was too arrogant to see the conflict. I called Silverbridge's executive director, Dr. Patricia Vance, and introduced myself as a Morrison & Associates employee with concerns about company practices. The conversation that followed was one of the most satisfying 20 minutes of my life. Age discrimination? Dr. Vance's voice sharpened immediately. At Morrison and Associates? Are you certain? I'm filing an EOC complaint and a federal lawsuit, I told her. I have documentation, witness statements, and a pattern of systematic harassment targeting employees over 50. The silence stretched so long I wondered if we'd been disconnected. Finally, Dr. Vance spoke, her voice cold as winter steel. Ms. Patterson, Silverbridge Foundation cannot and will not maintain business relationships with organizations that engage in age discrimination. We'll be freezing our contract renewal immediately pending a full investigation. When was that contract supposed to be renewed? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Next week, actually. We were planning to announce a 3-year extension at your quarterly meeting. Brooklyn Morrison specifically requested that we make the announcement during her presentation. Perfect. Brooklyn was expecting a triumphant moment where she'd announce a major contract extension, cement her reputation as a client relations genius, and bask in the admiration of company leadership. Instead, she'd be blindsided by the news that her biggest client had walked away because of her own discriminatory behavior. The pieces were falling into place with mathematical precision. The lawsuit would be filed Thursday, giving me the official paperwork by Friday morning. Silverbridge would notify the company of their contract freeze Thursday evening, timing it so Brooklyn wouldn't find out until she was already in front of the cameras. And I'd be sitting in that conference room with a folder full of evidence, ready to turn her moment of glory into a public reckoning. That Thursday night I barely slept. Tomorrow would either vindicate months of careful planning or expose me as a vindictive employee making wild accusations. But as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to rain tap against my windows, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Brooklyn had spent so much time underestimating me, dismissing my experience and competence, that she'd never considered I might be capable of strategic thinking. She saw an aging woman clinging to relevance, not a seasoned professional with decades of experience in planning campaigns, managing timelines, and executing complex strategies. Tomorrow she'd learn the difference between age and wisdom. And the lesson would be delivered in front of everyone who mattered to her career. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that promised change. I stood in my bedroom, fingering the fabric of my navy blazer, the same one I'd worn to accept the Excellence in Marketing Innovation Award 3 years ago. Back then, I'd felt invincible standing on that stage while industry leaders applauded my campaign that had revolutionized senior market targeting. Today the blazer felt like battle armor, each button a small act of defiance. The drive to the office was surreal. Every red light, every turn felt significant, as if the universe was giving me one last chance to change my mind. My phone buzzed with a text from Elizabeth. Paperwork filed. Confirmation in your email. Good luck today. I pulled into the parking lot and sat for a moment, watching Brooklyn's BMW gleaming in its reserved spot near the entrance. The quarterly meeting was scheduled for 10:30, but I arrived at 8 to prepare. The conference room buzzed with IT technicians setting up the livestream equipment, adjusting cameras and testing audio levels. I watched them work, knowing that in a few hours, this ordinary conference room would become the stage for Brooklyn's professional destruction. Big day today, Marcus said, passing by with his coffee. Brooklyn's been hyping this presentation for weeks. Something about major announcements and strategic partnerships. I managed a smile. Should be memorable. The morning crawled by with agonizing slowness. Every email notification made my heart jump. Every footstep in the hallway could be someone coming to tell me the plan had fallen apart. But at 10:15 I received the confirmation I'd been waiting for. Dr. Vance had officially notified company leadership that Silverbridge Foundation was freezing their contract pending investigation of discrimination allegations. Brooklyn would walk into that meeting expecting to announce a 3-year contract extension worth nearly $1 million. Instead, she'd learn that her biggest client had abandoned ship because of her own behavior. The conference room filled gradually. Regional managers appeared on the wall-mounted screens, their faces pixelated but attentive. HR Director Janet Sullivan settled into her usual front-row seat, tablet ready for note-taking. Legal counsel Robert Chin sat nearby, looking bored and checking his watch. Neither of them had any idea what was about to unfold. Brooklyn made her entrance at exactly 10:28, because she'd calculated that arriving 2 minutes before start time projected confidence without appearing rushed. She wore her signature red blazer, the one she claimed made her look executive-ready, and carried herself with the swagger of someone who owned the room. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice carrying that artificially sweet tone I'd learned to despise. "Before we dive into our quarterly updates, I have some housekeeping to address." My stomach clenched. This wasn't how I'd expected her to start. Brooklyn smiled that predatory smile and gestured vaguely in my direction. "As you all know, we've been evaluating our team structure to ensure optimal efficiency and relevance in today's rapidly evolving market landscape." The corporate speak was thick enough to choke on, but I recognized the setup. She was positioning my termination as a strategic business decision rather than what it really was: targeted harassment. "After careful consideration, we've decided to restructure Lillian's position." She made air quotes around the word restructure as if the euphemism was some kind of inside joke. "Lillian's been such a learning experience for all of us, and we think it's time for her to explore opportunities that better match her, shall we say, traditional skill set." A few people chuckled nervously. Sarah stared at her hands. Emma shifted uncomfortably in her chair. The silence that followed felt heavy and awkward, filled with the kind of tension that comes when everyone knows something wrong is happening but no one wants to be the one to say it. Brooklyn basked in the discomfort for a moment before continuing. "We're confident this decision will allow us to bring in fresh talent with contemporary perspectives that align with our forward-thinking approach." That was my cue. I stood up slowly, deliberately, the way I'd practiced in my living room mirror. The room fell completely silent. Even the whispered conversations from the remote participants seemed to stop. Every eye in the room focused on me as I walked to the front, my folder clutched in steady hands. Brooklyn's expression shifted from smug satisfaction to confusion as I approached the projector setup. "Lillian, what are you doing? This isn't really the time for..." I ignored her, pulling out my laptop and connecting it to the presentation system. The legal documents in my folder rustled as I distributed copies to Janet Sullivan, Robert Chin, and CO David Morrison, who just arrived and was taking his seat at the head of the table. "What is this?" Brooklyn asked, her voice climbing an octave. The confidence was already beginning to crack. I turned to face the room, my hands surprisingly steady as I navigated to my first slide. On screens across 3 states, my carefully prepared presentation replaced Brooklyn's corporate logo. "Slide 1, I said calmly, UC complaint confirmation, filed yesterday against Morrison and Associates for systematic age discrimination." The words hit the room like a physical force. Brooklyn's mouth fell open. Janet Sullivan leaned forward, suddenly very interested in the document I'd handed her. David Morrison's face went completely pale as he realized what was happening. "Slide 2, documented evidence of discriminatory comments and harassment, including audio recordings and witness statements." Brooklyn tried to interrupt. "This is completely inappropriate, you can't just..." "Slide 3, I continued, my voice cutting through her protests. Company handbook violations with specific policy citations." Each click of my presentation remote felt like firing a cannon. The room was so quiet I could hear the humming of the air conditioning, the soft whir of the cameras capturing everything for the company archive. "Slide 4, statements from former employees Margaret Chin and Paul Rodriguez, both over 50, both forced out under similar circumstances." Brooklyn finally found her voice. "This is highly inappropriate behavior during a professional meeting." "So is age discrimination," I replied, my voice steady and clear. For once, Brooklyn had no witty comeback, no dismissive gesture, no microphone to hide behind. "Slide 5, I said, advancing to my final slide. Contract freeze notification from Silverbridge Foundation, effective immediately, pending investigation of discrimination allegations." The impact was instantaneous and devastating. David Morrison's face shifted from pale to gray as he processed the financial implications. Brooklyn's carefully constructed world crumbled in real time as she realized her moment of triumph had become her professional execution. "That's impossible," she whispered, but her voice cracked on the words. "Silverbridge is announcing their contract extension today. We have a 3-year deal worth..." I corrected. Past tense. Dr. Vance called yesterday to inform the company that they cannot maintain business relationships with organizations that engage in age discrimination. Brooklyn's face cycled through 3 different shades of red in 30 seconds. She looked frantically around the room, seeking support, allies, anyone who might rescue her from this nightmare. But the colleagues who'd laughed at her jokes about my age now stared at their laptops, suddenly fascinated by their screens. "This is a setup," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is vindictive and unprofessional and documented," I finished. "Every incident, every comment, every email. All admissible in court." Robert Chin cleared his throat and leaned toward David Morrison. "We need to suspend this meeting immediately and convene emergency legal review." But the damage was already done. Brooklyn Morrison, the woman who'd spent months systematically destroying my professional dignity, sat slumped in her chair like a deflated balloon. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked exactly what she was: small, powerless, and completely outmaneuvered by someone she'd consistently underestimated. The taste of victory was sweeter than I'd imagined. The silence that followed my presentation was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't the quiet of a library or the hush of a church. It was the profound stillness that comes when the world shifts on its axis and everyone in the room realizes they've just witnessed something irreversible. David Morrison's hands trembled slightly as he set down the Silverbridge contract freeze letter. The paper seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds in his grip, each word representing not just lost revenue but a complete failure of leadership oversight. His eyes moved from the document to Brooklyn, then to me, then back to the document, as if he couldn't quite process how his Friday morning had transformed into a corporate nightmare. "Security," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the humming of the livestream equipment that was still broadcasting our corporate meltdown to offices across 3 states. "Please escort Ms. Morrison to her office to collect her personal items." Brooklyn's head snapped up like she'd been slapped. "David, you can't seriously be. This is a misunderstanding, a vindictive employee making false accusations." "The recording devices captured everything, Brooklyn." Janet Sullivan's voice cut through the room with surgical precision. "Including your comments about clients preferring younger faces and your instructions to keep older employees busy with tasks that wouldn't mess anything up." The color drained from Brooklyn's face as she realized the full scope of her exposure. Every meeting she'd dominated, every dismissive comment she'd made, every age-related joke she'd shared. All of it had been documented with the thoroughness of a federal investigation. Robert Chin closed his laptop with a decisive snap. "We need immediate damage control. Legal review of all terminations in the past 18 months, particularly employees over 45. Full audit of management practices. And someone needs to call our insurance carrier about potential liability exposure." As the security guard approached Brooklyn's chair, she made one last desperate attempt to salvage her dignity. "This is absurd. I built this department from nothing. My performance metrics speak for themselves. One disgruntled employee with a grudge can't undo years of successful leadership." "Your successful leadership just cost us nearly $1 million in annual revenue," David Morrison interrupted, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Your successful leadership has exposed us to federal discrimination charges. Your successful leadership is about to become front-page news in every industry publication that covers employment law." Brooklyn stood slowly, her red blazer no longer projecting power but making her look like a cardinal caught in a hunter's trap. As she gathered her purse, her eyes met mine for a split second. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something I'd never seen in her before: fear. Not fear of losing her job, but fear of being exposed as exactly what she was: a workplace bully whose cruelty had finally caught up with her. The security guard waited patiently as she walked toward the door, her heels clicking against the conference room floor with a hollow sound that echoed off the walls. Just before she reached the threshold, she turned back one final time. "This isn't over, Lillian," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Even she knew it was over. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and suddenly the room could breathe again. The executives on the video screens began talking in hushed tones, probably calculating how this disaster would affect their own regional offices. IT technicians started disconnecting equipment, eager to escape the corporate carnage they'd inadvertently broadcast. Janet Sullivan approached my seat with a manila folder tucked under her arm. "Lillian, we need to discuss next steps. Given the circumstances, we're placing you on administrative leave with full pay while we conduct our internal investigation." I nodded, understanding the corporate dance that had to be performed. They needed time to assess the damage, craft their response, and figure out how to minimize their legal exposure. We'll also be preparing a severance package, she continued, along with a formal letter of apology from the company for the treatment you endured. What kind of severance package? I asked, though I already suspected what was coming. Generous compensation, extended healthcare benefits, positive employment references. She paused, studying my face carefully. In exchange for a non-disclosure agreement regarding the events that led to your departure. There was the corporate equivalent of hush money, wrapped in professional language and tied with a bow made of legal protections. They wanted to pay me to disappear quietly, to take their money and never speak publicly about what Brooklyn had done or how the company had enabled her behavior. I'll need to review any offer with my attorney, I said, which was polite corporate speak for, absolutely not. Janet's expression shifted slightly, like she'd been expecting easy compliance and was recalibrating her approach. Of course. Take all the time you need. I think you'll find our offer quite reasonable. But reasonable wasn't what I was after. Justice was. Over the next week, the corporate fallout spread like wildfire through gasoline-soaked kindling. David Morrison called an emergency board meeting. The legal department worked overtime preparing damage assessments. HR launched what they euphemistically called a culture review, but what everyone knew was a desperate search for other potential liability time bombs. The most satisfying development came from an unexpected source. Linda Martinez from operations appeared at my door the following Tuesday evening, her face pale but determined. I heard what you did, she said without preamble. About Brooklyn, I mean. About standing up to her. Linda was 53, a 20-year company veteran who'd been quietly watching her responsibilities get reassigned to younger colleagues over the past year. She'd endured Brooklyn's jokes about digital natives, and suggestions that maybe she'd be more comfortable in a less demanding role. I've been documenting everything, she continued, pulling out a notebook remarkably similar to mine. Dates, times, witnesses. I thought I was going crazy, thought maybe I really was too old to keep up. But seeing you stand up in that meeting, seeing Brooklyn's face when you showed those slides, I realized I wasn't imagining things. By Thursday, Linda's testimony had been added to Elizabeth Morrison's expanding case file. By the following Monday, Janet Williams from sales had contacted my attorney with her own documentation of age-related harassment. Both women were over 50. Both had impeccable performance records. Both had been systematically marginalized by Brooklyn's modernization initiatives. The individual lawsuit I'd filed was transforming into something larger, more significant. 3 women, 3 decades of combined experience, 3 parallel stories of discrimination that painted a picture of systematic harassment too clear to deny or dismiss. Brooklyn's professional demise accelerated with stunning speed. Industry publications picked up the story within a week, framing it as a cautionary tale about workplace discrimination in the modern economy. Her LinkedIn profile, once filled with corporate buzzwords and leadership platitudes, went dark completely. Former colleagues reached out through intermediaries to distance themselves from her methods, suddenly remembering concerns they'd never voiced when she held power over their careers. The beautiful irony wasn't lost on me. Brooklyn, who'd built her career on staying ahead of trends and managing corporate image, had become the poster child for everything wrong with modern workplace culture. Her name became synonymous with age discrimination in professional circles, a cautionary tale shared in HR training sessions and whispered about in executive break rooms. The silence that followed my presentation had been profound, but the silence surrounding Brooklyn's professional exile was even more complete. In an industry built on networking and reputation, she'd become radioactive overnight. Nobody wanted to be associated with the marketing director who'd cost her company $1 million client and triggered a federal discrimination investigation. Sometimes the most devastating revenge isn't loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's simply watching someone's carefully constructed world collapse under the weight of their own actions, while everyone who once enabled them suddenly develops selective amnesia about ever knowing them at all. 3 months after rejecting Morrison & Associates' severance offer, I signed the lease on a small office space in downtown's Arts District. The building was a converted warehouse with exposed brick walls and windows that let in rivers of natural light, nothing like the sterile corporate environment I'd left behind. As I hung my marketing certifications on the wall next to my new business license, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. genuine excitement about going to work. Patterson Professional Consulting wasn't born from a grand business plan or market research. It emerged from necessity, from the dozens of phone calls that started flooding in after word of my stand against Brooklyn spread through professional networks. Women I'd never met were reaching out, sharing stories that felt like echoes of my own experience. The first call came from Patricia, a 54-year-old finance director in Chicago whose new manager had started questioning her adaptability to modern accounting software, despite her 20 years of flawless performance. She'd read about my case in an industry newsletter and wanted to know if I thought she was overreacting. "I keep wondering if I'm being paranoid," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Maybe I really am falling behind. Maybe he's right about my technical skills." Listening to her doubt herself, the same self-doubt Brooklyn had tried to plant in me, I realized my fight hadn't ended with that conference room presentation. It had just begun. "Patricia, when did this questioning of your skills start?" I asked, pulling out a fresh legal pad. "Right after my 54th birthday. He made a joke about it at the office party, said something about hoping I wasn't planning to retire anytime soon because training replacements was such a hassle." I started writing. Date, context, witnesses present. The same methodical documentation that had saved my career could save hers too. Within 6 weeks, I had 12 clients across 4 states. Each consultation began the same way, with a woman questioning her own competence, wondering if age had somehow diminished her professional value overnight. Each session ended with a detailed action plan, documentation strategies, legal resource contacts, and most importantly, a restored sense of personal worth. My breakthrough case came from an unexpected source. Dr. Susan Walsh, a renowned pediatric surgeon in Boston, contacted me about what she called a delicate situation at her hospital. At 57, she was being pressured to reduce her surgical schedule because younger doctors questioned whether her reflexes and stamina could handle complex procedures. "They're not saying I'm incompetent," she explained during our video consultation. "They're just suggesting I might be more comfortable in an advisory role. Less demanding, they say. More appropriate for someone at my stage of life." The language was different, but the pattern was identical. Systematic marginalization disguised as concern for the victim's well-being. Age discrimination wrapped in caring language and presented as professional development. Working with Dr. Walsh taught me something crucial about fighting these battles. Documentation was important, but understanding the psychology behind age discrimination was equally valuable. Managers like Brooklyn didn't wake up one morning deciding to target older employees. They were responding to deep-seated cultural biases about aging and relevance, biases that made their discrimination feel justified rather than cruel. 6 months into running my consulting practice, I received a call that made my chest tight with mixed emotions. Linda Martinez, my former colleague who joined the lawsuit against Morrison and Associates, was crying too hard to speak clearly at first. "Lillian, you need to see this," she finally managed. "The settlement. It's not just money. They're implementing actual policy changes. Mandatory bias training for all managers. New oversight procedures for performance reviews. An ombudsman specifically for age discrimination complaints." The settlement had taken 8 months to negotiate, but Elizabeth Morrison had extracted more than financial compensation. She'd forced Morrison and Associates to acknowledge systematic problems and implement structural changes to prevent future discrimination. Brooklyn's replacement had been chosen specifically for her track record of inclusive management, and she'd already reversed several of Brooklyn's modernization decisions. 3 women who were about to be forced out have been reinstated, Linda continued, with back pay and formal apologies. And get this, they've hired 2 new consultants, both over 50, to help rebuild the department's institutional knowledge. Institutional knowledge. The same phrase Brooklyn had used dismissively was now recognized as valuable corporate asset worth protecting and leveraging. But perhaps the most satisfying update came through an entirely different channel. Marcus, my former colleague from the creative department, invited me for coffee 6 months after my dramatic exit. We met at a trendy cafe downtown, the kind of place Brooklyn would have loved. Exposed Edison bulbs, reclaimed wood tables, baristas with carefully cultivated stubble. "I have to tell you something," Marcus said, stirring sugar into his espresso with nervous energy. "About Brooklyn." I waited, not sure I wanted to hear whatever was coming next. "She's working freelance now. Small clients, mostly startups that can't afford established agencies. I saw her at Starbucks last week, laptop open, working alone. He paused, studying my face for a reaction. She looked diminished, like someone who'd lost something essential and couldn't figure out how to get it back. I waited for the surge of satisfaction, the vindictive pleasure that should accompany news of your former tormentor's professional decline. Instead, I felt something unexpected, a quiet sense of completion, like a book closing after the final chapter. How do you feel about that? Marcus asked, clearly expecting some form of celebration. Settled, I said, surprising myself with the word. Like the universe found its balance again. Justice doesn't always feel triumphant. Sometimes it just feels necessary, like gravity or sunrise. Natural consequences following inevitable laws. These days, I drive past the Morrison and Associates building occasionally, usually when I'm heading to client meetings in that part of the city. The structure looks smaller somehow, less imposing than it did when I worked there. Through the conference room windows, I can see people in meetings, presentations happening, careers being built and challenged and defended. I think about the women still working inside those walls, wondering if they feel safer now, if the policy changes have created real cultural shifts or just better hidden biases. Change in corporate environments moves slowly, like shifting continental plates. Imperceptible day to day but massive over time. My reflection in those windows shows someone I recognize but hadn't seen in years. A professional woman who commands respect through competence rather than demanding it through fear. Someone who understands that true power comes from lifting others up, not pushing them down. Sometimes the best revenge isn't dramatic confrontation or public humiliation. Sometimes it's simply building something better from the ashes of what tried to destroy you, then helping others do the same. Brooklyn may have tried to write my ending, but I chose when to turn the page, and the new chapter turned out to be the best one yet. If this story of workplace justice had you cheering from your seat, press that like button right now. My favorite part was when Lillian calmly walked to that projector and Brooklyn's face went from smug to horrified in seconds. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more empowering stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss when someone gets the justice they deserve. On my first day in my new home, my stepbrother looked me up and down and said, "You'll never be part of this family." He made my life hell, thinking I'd always be under his control. But 10 years later he stood in front of me begging because I was now. The day I moved into the Mitchell mansion, my stepbrother Nathan looked at me like I was dirt on his designer shoes. "This isn't your home," he'd sneered, "and it never will be." Now, a decade later, he stood before me in the same mansion, but this time he wasn't sneering. This time he was begging. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank each of you for being part of this incredible journey of revenge and redemption. If you're enjoying these stories of power dynamics and family transformation, consider subscribing. It's completely free and helps us build this thriving community. Let's dive in. But let me take you back to where it all began. The Mitchell name wasn't just a family legacy. It was an empire built on steel, glass, and 3 generations of calculated business moves. At its helm stood Ryan Mitchell, a man whose reputation for brilliance was matched only by his recent tragedy. The death of his wife Caroline in a car accident had left both the company and their son Nathan adrift. I remember the first time I set foot in Mitchell Enterprises. The marble lobby gleamed like freshly fallen snow, and the elevator whispered as it carried us to the executive floor. My mother, Haley, squeezed my hand reassuringly. She'd recently been promoted to marketing director, and at 46, her elegance and innovative strategies had caught more than just the board's attention. Ryan Mitchell saw in her what others missed. Not just beauty, but a brilliant mind that could revolutionize his company. Their courtship was brief but sincere. Love, it seemed, could bloom even in the sterile environment of corporate boardrooms. Nathan, however, saw our arrival differently. At 22, he was the presumed heir to Mitchell Enterprises, groomed since birth for a position he believed was his birthright. The day we moved in, I found him in his father's study, lounging in a leather chair that probably cost more than my entire college semester. "Let me make something crystal clear," he drawled, swirling aged scotch in a crystal tumbler. "This little rags to riches story you and your mother are playing at? It ends the moment my father realizes his mistake." His blue eyes, so like his father's, held none of Ryan's warmth. "You're 20, barely out of community college and completely out of your depth." I'd stood there, my hands trembling but my voice steady. We're not here to take anything from you, Nathan. His laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. No. Then why did your mother pursue a recently widowed billionaire? Wake up, little sister. Gold diggers come in all forms, even ones with MBA aspirations. The weeks that followed set the tone for our new family dynamic. Nathan orchestrated a subtle campaign of exclusion that would have made Machiavelli proud. Board meetings mysteriously rescheduled to conflict with my classes. Important family events I learned about only after they'd passed. Whispers in the hallways that stopped the moment I appeared. Ryan remained blind to it all, too consumed by his new happiness and the demands of running a global corporation. My mother advised patience, reminding me that success was the best revenge. But watching Nathan preen and posture in his tailored suits, flaunting his Harvard Business School pedigree, though he'd later drop out, tested every ounce of my restraint. The mansion itself became a battlefield of silent warfare. Every morning, Nathan made sure I overheard his calls to board members, dropping casual mentions of his future plans for the company. Every evening he'd remind me of my place. The outsider, the pretender, the unwanted addition to his perfect world. But Nathan's greatest weakness was his own arrogance. While he focused on maintaining his image as the golden heir, he failed to notice what was happening right under his nose. I watched, learned, and most importantly, I documented everything. Every slight, every underhanded comment, every questionable business decision he made when his father wasn't looking. The breaking point came during a charity gala hosted at the mansion. Nathan had been drinking heavily, his carefully maintained facade cracking under the influence of expensive scotch. As I discussed potential market expansions with a board member, he interrupted with a laugh that drew every eye in the room. "Isn't it precious?" he announced, loud enough to silence all other conversations. The little stepsister thinking she understands business. "Tell me, Olivia, did you learn about market dynamics before or after your mother seduced my father?" The silence that followed was deafening. But as I stood there, feeling hundreds of eyes on me, something crystallized in my mind. Nathan's greatest mistake wasn't his cruelty. It was his underestimation. He saw me as a threat to his inheritance but failed to recognize me as a threat to his empire. That night, standing in my room overlooking the Boston skyline, I made myself a promise. Nathan Mitchell, who had everything handed to him since birth, would learn that true power isn't inherited, it's earned. His dismissal of me would become his greatest regret, a lesson written in the ink of corporate takeovers and boardroom coups. The game was just beginning, and Nathan had no idea he was already 3 moves behind. The morning after the charity gala, whispers of Nathan's outburst rippled through Mitchell Enterprises like wildfire. My mother, Haley, found me in the mansion's conservatory, surrounded by the exotic flowers Caroline Mitchell had once cultivated. Her face carried concern, but her eyes held something else: determination. "What Nathan said last night," she began, her voice steady despite the pain I knew she felt. "It wasn't just about you. He's lashing out because he sees what Ryan sees in us. Potential for change." She took my hands in hers, their warmth anchoring me. "Your stepfather asked me to be his wife last week. I wanted to tell you first, but after last night, the news shouldn't have surprised me. I'd seen the way Ryan looked at my mother during board meetings, how he valued her insight beyond just professional courtesy. Their romance had blossomed naturally, born from late-night strategy sessions and shared visions for the company's future. Ryan saw in Haley what Nathan refused to acknowledge: a brilliant mind that had revolutionized Mitchell Enterprises' marketing approach. The wedding was a quiet affair, elegant but intimate. Nathan's absence spoke volumes, though he made sure the society pages carried his heartfelt quotes about welcoming new family. Ryan seemed to finally notice the tension, pulling his son aside for what looked like a stern conversation during the reception. But I knew better than to hope for change. What no one expected was how seamlessly my mother stepped into her new role. Haley Mitchell proved to be more than just a CEO's wife. She became his trusted advisor, bringing fresh perspectives to century-old business practices. Under her influence, Mitchell Enterprises' marketing strategies evolved, capturing markets their competitors had written off as unprofitable. "Your mother's brilliant," Ryan confided in me one evening, as we watched her charm potential investors at a business dinner. "She sees opportunities others miss, understands people in a way I never could." His eyes, usually sharp with business acumen, softened when they landed on her. I haven't felt this alive since Caroline. But with each of my mother's successes, Nathan's hostility grew more pronounced. He began undermining her initiatives in board meetings, questioning her expertise with thinly veiled contempt. Interesting strategy, he'd drawl, lounging in his chair like a bored prince. But perhaps someone with more traditional business experience should weigh in? Ryan's defense of Haley was immediate and unwavering. Your stepmother built her career from nothing. He reminded Nathan sharply after one particularly tense meeting. She understands the modern market in ways our traditional approaches never could. The dynamics at home shifted too. What started as uncomfortable family dinners evolved into strategic planning sessions, with Ryan and Haley bouncing ideas off each other while Nathan stewed in silence. I watched, learning more about business strategy from these conversations than any textbook could teach. My mother's influence extended beyond the boardroom. She began modernizing the Mitchell mansion, not erasing Caroline's touches but enhancing them. The conservatory bloomed with new life, and the stuffy formal dining room transformed into a space that encouraged actual conversation. Even the staff seemed to breathe easier under her management. She's trying to erase Mom's memory, Nathan accused one day, cornering me in the library. And Father's too blind with infatuation to see it. His words carried the bitter taste of expensive scotch, a habit that was becoming increasingly noticeable. But what Nathan failed to understand was that Haley wasn't trying to replace anyone. She was creating her own legacy. Her marriage to Ryan wasn't about power or money. It was about shared vision, mutual respect, and genuine love. Every decision she made, whether for the company or our blended family, came from a place of genuine care and strategic insight. The turning point came during the company's annual shareholder meeting. Haley presented a comprehensive digital transformation strategy that would revolutionize Mitchell Enterprises' approach to global markets. The board's approval was unanimous, except for Nathan, who stormed out before the vote concluded. That evening I overheard Ryan and Nathan arguing in the study. She's changing everything. Nathan's voice cracked with fury. This isn't what Mom would have wanted. Your mother, Ryan replied quietly, would have been the first to embrace change if it meant growth. Haley isn't erasing our past, son. She's securing our future. As I stood there listening to the echoes of their argument, I realized something crucial. Nathan's hatred wasn't just about protecting his inheritance. It was about preserving a past that no longer served the present. While he clung to old ways, my mother was quietly revolutionizing the very foundation of Mitchell Enterprises. And in doing so, she had unknowingly given me the perfect blueprint for my own revolution. The game was evolving and so were the players. Nathan might have been born into power, but I was learning how to earn it, one strategic move at a time. While Nathan drowned his frustrations in expensive scotch and boardroom tantrums, I was quietly building my own empire from within. Each morning, before the rest of the Mitchell household stirred, I slipped into the study to review international market reports. Every evening, long after the cleaning staff had gone home, I pored over the company's financial histories, learning from both their triumphs and failures. My acceptance into Harvard Business School's MBA program came with little fanfare. I made sure of that. Nathan's dramatic dropout from the same program months earlier had created enough headlines for both of us. While he spent his nights at exclusive clubs, I spent mine mastering financial models and corporate strategy. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was excelling in the very institution he'd dismissed as beneath him. Ryan noticed my dedication, though he misinterpreted its purpose. You remind me of Caroline, he mentioned one evening, finding me analyzing quarterly reports. She had that same fire, that drive to understand every aspect of the business. His words, meant as a compliment, only fueled my determination. I wasn't aiming to be just another Mitchell success story. I was writing my own. Between classes, I cultivated relationships with industry leaders who saw past my age to recognize my potential. Thomas Sterling, a veteran investment banker, became an unlikely mentor after I impressed him with my analysis of emerging market trends. You've got something rare, he told me over coffee. The patience to learn and the instinct to act. Most people have one or the other. But my most valuable education came from watching my mother navigate the corporate landscape. Haley's subtle influence had transformed Mitchell Enterprises' culture without ever seeming to force change. She taught me that true power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it works best in whispers and careful suggestions. I started taking on small projects within the company, ones beneath Nathan's notice but crucial to operations. Each success added to my growing network of allies among the middle management and staff. While Nathan commanded respect through his title, I earned it through results. The breakthrough came during a crisis with our Asian markets. Nathan had dismissed early warnings about supply chain vulnerabilities, too focused on maintaining his lavish lifestyle to notice the signs. When the problem exploded into a full-blown crisis, I was ready with a comprehensive solution that I'd been quietly developing for months. "This is remarkable work," Ryan said, reviewing my proposal during an emergency board meeting. Nathan sat across the table, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and something else, fear. For the first time he was seeing me not as his unwanted stepsister, but as a genuine threat. My solution not only saved the company millions but also opened new opportunities in previously untapped markets. The board members who had once dismissed me as Mitchell's stepdaughter now sought my opinion on strategic decisions. I was building my reputation one calculated move at a time. Under the guise of professional development, I began attending exclusive industry events, making connections that would prove invaluable. Each handshake, each exchanged business card, was another piece in my carefully constructed network. The same social circles that Nathan took for granted I approached with strategic precision. The most satisfying moment came during the annual Tech Innovation Conference in Singapore. Nathan had been scheduled to present Mitchell Enterprises' digital transformation strategy, a presentation he'd barely prepared for. Hours before the event, he was found nursing a hangover in his hotel room. I stepped in, delivering a presentation that earned standing ovations and, more importantly, several lucrative partnerships. "You've been holding out on us, Olivia," a board member commented afterward. "Why haven't we seen more of this?" The question was directed at Ryan, who looked both proud and thoughtful. Nathan, watching from the back of the room, gripped his water glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. That evening, I stood on my hotel balcony, watching Singapore's skyline glitter like a constellation of opportunities. My phone buzzed with congratulatory messages from industry leaders and potential investors. Each one represented another crack in Nathan's presumed birthright. But the true victory wasn't in the applause or the contracts. It was in the subtle shift of power I felt in the boardroom the next morning. Nathan's voice, once dominant in every meeting, was now just one among many. His opinions, previously taken as gospel, were being questioned, challenged, and often dismissed. I caught his reflection in the boardroom's glass walls, the perfect air, watching his kingdom slowly slip through his fingers. He hadn't lost yet, but for the first time he could see the possibility of defeat. And in that moment, staring at his shaken reflection, I knew the game was about to enter its next phase. The hidden genius was hidden no longer, and Nathan's worst nightmare was just beginning to unfold. The morning after the Singapore conference, I launched the first phase of my master plan. Using the capital I'd quietly accumulated through strategic investments, I established Winter Innovations, a tech startup that would become the cornerstone of my empire. The name was a subtle nod to my past before I became a Mitchell, when my mother and I had nothing but our determination. The business world's reaction was immediate. "Young Mitchell heiress ventures solo," the headlines proclaimed, though I was quick to correct them. "I'm not a Mitchell heiress," I told Forbes in my first interview. "I'm Olivia Winters and I'm building something of my own." The message was clear. I wasn't riding on the Mitchell name, I was creating my own legacy. My first acquisition was a small but innovative software company that Mitchell Enterprises had overlooked. Nathan had dismissed them as too small to matter, another oversight born of his arrogance. Within 6 months, our revolutionary supply chain management system was dominating the market, drawing clients away from Mitchell Enterprises' outdated solutions. "Impressive move," Thomas Sterling commented during one of our regular strategy sessions. "You're not just building a company, you're creating a narrative that the market loves." The self-made woman challenging the old guard. His smile held a mixture of pride and anticipation. Nathan must be furious. He was more than furious. During a family dinner he finally confronted me. "Is this your idea of revenge?" he demanded, his composure cracking. "Stealing our clients with cut-rate technology?" I met his gaze steadily. "No, Nathan. This is business. Something you might understand if you spent more time innovating and less time trading on your last name." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Ryan looked taken aback by my directness. Winter Innovations grew exponentially. Each acquisition was strategic, building towards a capability that would directly compete with Mitchell Enterprises' core businesses. I worked 18-hour days, personally overseeing every major decision. While Nathan attended charity galas and yacht parties, I was in the trenches, building something unprecedented. The turning point came when I secured a partnership with Mitchell Enterprises' largest competitor. The deal made headlines not just for its size but for its implications. Winter Innovations, the new face of tech innovation, declared the Wall Street Journal. The article specifically noted how our approach differed from traditional companies like Mitchell Enterprises. Nathan's response was predictable. He tried to have our contracts with shared clients invalidated, claiming conflict of interest due to my family connection. The attempt backfired spectacularly when those same clients publicly defended Winter Innovations' superior service and innovation. "Your brother's getting sloppy," my mother observed one evening, finding me in my home office reviewing acquisition proposals. "He's letting emotions cloud his judgment." She wasn't wrong. Nathan's increasingly erratic decisions were causing concern among Mitchell Enterprises board members. Through carefully placed sources, I learned that Nathan had begun liquidating his personal shares in Mitchell Enterprises to fund a lavish lifestyle that even his generous allowance couldn't sustain. Each sale was an opportunity, and through a network of shell companies, I was quietly becoming one of Mitchell Enterprises' largest shareholders. The business world watched with fascination as Winter Innovations continued its meteoric rise. We were winning awards for innovation, sustainability, and corporate culture. The contrast with Mitchell Enterprises' declining market share and traditional approach couldn't have been starker. Ryan, ever the astute businessman, saw the writing on the wall. During a private meeting in his study, he broached the subject I'd been waiting for. "You've built something remarkable, Olivia," he said, swirling his scotch thoughtfully. "Something that could secure Mitchell Enterprises' future, if we were to explore a merger." I kept my expression neutral, though inside my heart raced. "That would be a significant change in leadership structure," I replied carefully. "The board would need to be convinced it's in the company's best interest." His next words confirmed what I'd suspected. Nathan's position wasn't as secure as he believed. "The board is already asking questions about succession planning. Your brother's recent decisions have raised concerns." As I left Ryan's study that evening, I caught sight of Nathan watching from the shadows of the hallway. The anger in his eyes told me he'd overheard everything. But for once there was something else there too: fear. The golden heir was finally realizing that his kingdom was built on sand, and the tide was coming in. The next phase of my plan was ready to begin, and Nathan's worst nightmare was about to become reality. The phoenix wasn't just rising, it was preparing to reshape the entire landscape. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. on a crisp autumn morning. I arrived early, watching the sunrise paint Mitchell Tower in shades of gold. Fitting, considering what was about to unfold. The boardroom, with its sweeping views of Boston's skyline, had been the stage for countless power plays over the years. Today would be its most dramatic yet. Nathan burst through the doors at 8:57, his usually immaculate appearance showing signs of strain. The dark circles under his eyes and slightly askew tie told the story of a sleepless night. His eyes narrowed when they met mine, but I merely smiled. The chess pieces were already in motion. "Before we begin," I addressed the board, rising from my seat, "I believe there are some matters of ownership that need to be clarified." With practiced calm, I distributed folders containing documents that would shatter Nathan's world. Over the past 18 months, Winter Innovations has acquired a controlling interest in Mitchell Enterprises through various subsidiaries. The silence that followed was absolute. Nathan's face drained of color as he frantically flipped through the papers. Each page revealed another piece of the puzzle. The shell companies, the quiet acquisitions, the strategic positioning that had been happening right under his nose. "This is impossible," he sputtered, but the numbers didn't lie. Through careful maneuvering and Nathan's own careless selling of shares, I now controlled 51% of Mitchell Enterprises. The empire he thought was his birthright had slipped through his fingers while he was busy maintaining his playboy image. Ryan sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable as he reviewed the documentation. "Everything appears to be in order," he finally said, his voice carrying a mix of pride and resignation. "The acquisition is legally sound. This is a joke. Nathan stood, his chair scraping against the floor. Father, you can't seriously be considering this. She's not even a real Mitchell. No, I agreed, my voice steady. I'm something better. I'm the CEO who's going to save this company from your mismanagement. Turning to the board, I presented my comprehensive restructuring plan. Mitchell Enterprises' market share has dropped 15% under current leadership. Our traditional approaches are failing in a digital age. Merger with Winter Innovations isn't just an option. It's a necessity. The presentation that followed was meticulous, highlighting the synergies between the companies and the clear path to market dominance. While Nathan had been hosting yacht parties, I'd been crafting a vision for the future that the board couldn't ignore. One by one, the board members voiced their support. Even those who had once dismissed me as the stepdaughter couldn't deny the logic of the merger. Nathan watched in horror as his allies abandoned him, swayed by the undeniable potential of the combined enterprises. I moved to approve the merger and the appointment of Olivia Winters as CEO of the combined entity, Thomas Sterling announced, his voice carrying the weight of his decades of influence. The vote that followed was nearly unanimous. Nathan's last hope died when Ryan raised his hand in favor. The business world isn't about birthright anymore, he said, looking directly at his son. It's about innovation, vision, and the courage to embrace change. Olivia has proven she has all three. As the reality of his situation sank in, Nathan's composure finally shattered. This was your plan all along, he accused, pointing a trembling finger at me. Everything, befriending board members, expanding into our markets, even that stupid supply chain solution. It was all about taking what's mine. No, Nathan, I replied calmly, standing to my full height. It was about earning what you took for granted. The difference between us isn't just strategy. It's understanding that power isn't a birthright, it's a responsibility. The meeting concluded with the formal announcement of my appointment as CEO. As board members filed out, offering congratulations, I caught my mother's eye across the room. Her subtle nod carried years of shared understanding. We had both risen from nothing, fought against prejudice and dismissal, and emerged stronger. Nathan remained slumped in his chair, staring out at the city that had watched his fall from grace. What happens to me now? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. I placed a contract in front of him. You have two choices. Accept a position under my leadership, learn the business properly this time, and earn your place. Or walk away with your trust fund. Either way, the days of your unchecked authority are over. As I left the boardroom, my heels clicking against the marble floors that had once intimidated me, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. 10 years ago, I'd stood in this same building, bearing the weight of Nathan's contempt. Now I carried something far heavier. The responsibility of leading two merged empires into the future. The game was over, but the real work was just beginning. 3 weeks after the takeover, I sat in what was once Nathan's corner office, now transformed to reflect my vision. Gone were the gaudy gold fixtures and pretentious oil paintings, replaced by sleek modern designs and wall-to-wall digital displays showing real-time company metrics. The view of Boston's skyline remained the same, but everything else had changed. Nathan had chosen to stay, though not out of loyalty or desire for redemption. His trust fund, I discovered, was nearly depleted through years of extravagant spending. He needed the job and we both knew it. Now he sat across from me, reviewing the quarterly reports I'd assigned him, a task he'd previously delegated to junior analysts. These numbers don't make sense, he muttered, frustration evident in his voice. How did we lose market share in the Asian sector when the projections were so strong? Perhaps if you'd attended the strategy meetings instead of sending representatives, you'd understand, I replied, not bothering to look up from my tablet. The market changed. We adapted. That's why Winter Innovations succeeded where Mitchell Enterprises failed. The daily humiliation of reporting to his former stepsister was clearly taking its toll. Nathan's designer suits had been replaced by more modest attire, his arrogant swagger reduced to a hesitant shuffle. Every morning he had to walk past the office that was once his birthright, now bearing my name in elegant silver letters. During board meetings, I made sure Nathan presented his own analysis rather than relying on his team. Each stumble, each moment of uncertainty, reinforced what the board already knew. They'd made the right choice in supporting the merger. His once loyal supporters now directed their questions to me, treating him like any other middle manager. You're enjoying this, aren't you? he accused one evening, catching me alone in the executive lounge. Making me jump through hoops, watching me struggle with basic reports. I set down my coffee, meeting his gaze steadily. What I enjoy, Nathan, is running this company effectively. Something you never bothered to learn how to do. Every task I assign you is an opportunity to prove you deserve your position. Not because of your last name, but because of your capabilities. The merger's success exceeded even the most optimistic projections. Our stock price soared as we introduced innovations that seamlessly blended Mitchell Enterprises' established infrastructure with Winter Innovations' cutting-edge technology. The market responded enthusiastically to our new direction, and competitors scrambled to keep up. Nathan's redemption, however, was proving more challenging than his fall. During a crucial client presentation, he faltered, unable to answer basic questions about our new integrated systems. The client's representatives exchanged uncomfortable glances as I stepped in to salvage the meeting. "You set me up to fail," he accused afterward, his face flushed with humiliation. "You knew I wasn't ready for that presentation." "No, Nathan. You set yourself up to fail years ago when you decided that your name was enough to guarantee success." I handed him a folder of technical specifications. "Learn these. Understand them. Your next presentation is in 2 weeks." The transformation of the company culture was dramatic. Employees who had once feared Nathan's volatile temper now thrived under my leadership. Innovation wasn't just encouraged, it was expected. Merit, not lineage, determined advancement. During a charity gala, the same event where Nathan had once publicly humiliated me, I watched him working the room with a newfound humility. He was learning slowly but surely that respect had to be earned. The whispers that followed him now weren't about his power or influence, but about his fall from grace. "Your brother seems different," Ryan observed, joining me at the bar. "Less entitled," I supplied. Amazing what actual responsibility can do. The sweet taste of victory wasn't in watching Nathan struggle. It was in watching the company flourish. Each successful quarter, each innovative launch, each satisfied client validated my vision. The empire Nathan had taken for granted was being reshaped into something stronger, more dynamic, and undeniably mine. 1 year after the takeover, I called Nathan into my office. The skyline behind me was bathed in the golden light of sunset, a reminder of how much had changed. "You've completed your probationary period," I informed him. "The board has reviewed your performance." He sat straighter, a flash of his old confidence returning. "And?" I slid a document across the desk. "You're being promoted to head of regional operations. You've earned it, not because you're a Mitchell, but because you finally learned what that name should mean. Dedication, innovation, and humility." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. 10 years ago he'd sneered that I'd never be part of his family. Now I was teaching him how to live up to his own name. The sweet taste of power wasn't in the victory itself. It was in reshaping the very legacy he'd once lorded over me. The promotion marked a turning point, but not in the way anyone expected. As head of regional operations, Nathan finally had a chance to prove himself. And that's exactly when the facade began to crack. The first signs were subtle. Missed deadlines, inconsistent reports, and an increasing tendency to delegate crucial responsibilities. I watched from my office as he slowly unraveled. The pressure of actually earning his position, of being held accountable for real results, was proving too much for someone who'd spent his life coasting on the Mitchell name. During board meetings, his presentations became increasingly erratic, filled with grandiose promises he couldn't keep. The breaking point came during a routine audit. Our financial team discovered discrepancies in the regional accounts. Nothing illegal, but enough corner-cutting and mismanagement to raise serious concerns. Nathan had been masking losses with creative accounting, desperately trying to maintain the illusion of success. "Care to explain this?" I asked, spreading the audit reports across my desk. Nathan's face, already pale, turned ashen. The numbers told a story of incompetence masked by desperation. "I can fix it," he stammered, his confident facade crumbling. "Just give me time to restructure the department. The losses aren't as bad as they look. The losses aren't the problem, Nathan. The deception is." I leaned back in my chair watching him squirm. "Did you think I wouldn't notice? That the same attention to detail that built this company wouldn't catch your mistakes?" The board meeting that followed was brutal. Every shortcut, Every hidden loss, every instance of mismanagement was laid bare. Nathan sat there, his designer tie askew as his house of cards collapsed around him. The board members who had once praised his family name now looked at him with undisguised contempt. "This is unacceptable," Thomas Sterling declared, his voice heavy with disappointment. "The Mitchell name used to stand for integrity. Now it seems to represent nothing but smoke and mirrors." Ryan, watching his son's public humiliation, aged years in those few hours. The man who had built an empire on trust and innovation now had to witness his heir apparent reveal himself as nothing more than a skilled pretender. "I move for immediate suspension pending a full investigation," another board member proposed. The vote was unanimous. Nathan, the golden boy who once thought himself untouchable, was escorted from the building by security. The press had a field day. "Mitchell heir suspended amid financial scandal," screamed the headlines. Every news outlet that had once celebrated his birthright now dissected his fall with savage glee. The very privilege he'd wielded as a weapon had become his greatest vulnerability. In the aftermath, I discovered just how deep the rot went. Nathan had been borrowing heavily against his trust fund, trying to maintain the lifestyle he thought he deserved. His apartment was mortgaged to the hilt, his investments were leveraged beyond reason, and his reputation in the business world was in tatters. "I never wanted it to end like this," he confessed during a private meeting in my office. "The arrogant stepbrother who had once looked down on me now couldn't even meet my eyes. Everything I touched turned to ash." "Because you never learned to build," I replied. "You only knew how to spend and pretend." The Mitchell legacy deserved better than that. The investigation concluded with a damning report. While no criminal charges were filed, the evidence of mismanagement and deception was overwhelming. The board's decision was unanimous. Nathan Mitchell would be removed from all operational roles within the company. As he cleared out his office, I watched from my doorway. The designer suits and premium watches were gone, replaced by off-the-rack clothing that better reflected his new reality. Each box he packed was another piece of his shattered legacy. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "That depends on you," I answered. "The Mitchell name still means something in this city, but not because of birthright. It means something because of what we build, what we earn, and how we conduct ourselves. You have a choice. Learn those lessons or keep living in denial." As he walked out of Mitchell Tower for the last time, I thought about that first day when he'd sneered at me, declaring I'd never be part of his family. The irony was complete. He had become the outsider, while I had become the guardian of his family's true legacy. The house of cards had fallen, but from its ruins something stronger would rise. Something built on merit, not inheritance. Something worthy of the Mitchell name. The Mitchell mansion felt different the Sunday after Nathan's departure. The usual family dinner, a tradition my mother had stubbornly maintained through all our years of tension, held an air of funeral solemnity. Ryan sat at the head of the table, aging decades in days, pushing food around his plate without eating. "He's staying at the lake house," my mother broke the silence, her voice gentle but firm. "I've made sure the staff there will keep an eye on him." Even now, Haley's practical nature showed through, always finding solutions, always managing crises. Ryan looked up, his eyes hollow. "I failed him, didn't I? Somewhere between building this empire and trying to preserve Caroline's memory, I missed the signs. My son became exactly what I never wanted, entitled, reckless, empty." The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. I felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. For all my calculated moves, for all my justified revenge, I hadn't fully considered how this would affect the man who had welcomed us into his life, who had treated me with more fatherly care than Nathan had ever shown brotherly love. "You didn't fail him," my mother reached for Ryan's hand. "Nathan made his own choices. We all tried to help him understand what real responsibility means." The following weeks brought changes to our family dynamic that none of us had anticipated. Ryan threw himself into philanthropic work, perhaps seeking redemption through giving back to the community. My mother balanced her time between supporting her husband and maintaining stability in the company's marketing division. And I discovered that victory carried its own kind of loneliness. The media circus intensified, digging into every aspect of our family history. Old photos surfaced, Nathan and his mother Caroline at charity events, school graduations, family vacations. Each image seemed designed to paint me as the villain who had destroyed an American dynasty. The fact that I had earned my position through merit rather than manipulation was conveniently overlooked. One evening I found Ryan in his study surrounded by old family albums. "Caroline would have liked you," he said without looking up. "She believed in earning success, not inheriting it. That's what I forgot to teach our son." "I never meant to destroy your family," I admitted, surprising myself with the truth in those words. He finally met my eyes. "You didn't destroy it, Olivia. You showed us what it should have been all along. Nathan's fall is not your burden to bear." The conversation with my mother came later that week, over late-night coffee in the kitchen. "Are you happy?" she asked simply. "Not successful. I know you're that. But happy?" The question caught me off guard. In all my careful planning, in all my strategic moves, I had never stopped to consider happiness. "I'm satisfied," I answered carefully. "That's not the same thing," she smiled sadly. "Power can be lonely, sweetheart. Make sure your victory doesn't become your prison." The truth of her words hit home during the annual Mitchell Foundation Gala. I stood at the podium delivering a speech about the company's new direction, and caught sight of Nathan's empty seat. The victory felt hollow, somehow incomplete. The revenge I'd pursued for so long had left a void that success couldn't quite fill. Ryan's health began to suffer under the strain. Though he never said it directly, watching his son's public downfall had taken a toll. The man who had once commanded boardrooms with his presence now seemed diminished, weighted down by regret and what-ifs. "He needs his son," my mother said one evening, finding me working late in my home office. "Not the entitled boy who thought the world owed him everything, but the man he could become. If he's willing to learn." Her words stirred something unexpected in me. The satisfaction of watching Nathan's fall had begun to fade, replaced by a different kind of ambition. Perhaps true victory wasn't in destruction but in transformation. Not just of the company but of the family that, despite everything, I had become part of. I found myself driving to the lake house the next morning. The guards looked surprised to see me but let me through without question. Nathan sat on the deck, staring out at the water, a shadow of his former self. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by casual wear that seemed to better suit him somehow. As I walked toward him, I realized that the price of power wasn't just measured in stock prices and board votes. It was measured in the weight of responsibilities, in the understanding that true leadership sometimes meant finding strength in forgiveness. The conversation we were about to have would change everything, again. But this time perhaps for the better. Nathan didn't stand when I approached the deck, but his shoulders tensed, acknowledging my presence. The morning mist rolled off the lake, shrouding us in a strange intimacy that felt appropriate for what was to come. The silence stretched between us, heavy with a decade of rivalry, pain, and unspoken truths. "Have you come to gloat?" His voice was hoarse, lacking its usual polished edge. "To see how far the mighty have fallen?" I took a seat beside him, watching the ripples on the water. "No. I came because it's time we had an honest conversation. Something we should have done 10 years ago when you first decided I was your enemy." He laughed, a hollow sound that held no humor. "Honest? You systematically dismantled everything I had, everything I was supposed to be. What's left to be honest about?" "The fact that you never had to be my enemy," I turned to face him. "That your birthright wasn't under threat until you made it your whole identity. That you could have been so much more than just Ryan Mitchell's son." The words hung in the air between us. Nathan's hands gripped the armrests of his chair, knuckles white with tension. For the first time I saw him not as my tormentor or my rival, but as someone who had been trapped by his own expectations. "Dad's sick, isn't he?" he asked quietly. "I see it in the papers how tired he looks at events. The board meetings he's been missing." I nodded. "The stress of everything. It's taken its toll. He misses his son, Nathan. Not the heir, not the businessman, his son." A lone tear traced down his cheek, quickly wiped away. "I don't know how to be that anymore. I'm not sure I ever did." "Then learn," I said simply. "Not for the company, not for the Mitchell name, but for yourself. The position of Regional Operations Director is still open. You'd start from the bottom this time, no shortcuts, no special treatment. Learn the business the right way." He turned to me, suspicion warring with hope in his eyes. "Why would you give me another chance? After everything I did to you?" "Because revenge brought me power, but it didn't bring me peace," I admitted. "And maybe, just maybe, redemption is a better legacy than retribution." The next few months transformed both the company and our family in ways I never expected. Nathan returned to Mitchell Enterprises, not as the entitled heir, but as a junior executive willing to learn. Every morning he arrived early, diving into reports and market analyses with a dedication that surprised everyone. Ryan's health improved as he watched his son's genuine efforts at change. The light returned to his eyes, especially during the weekly dinners where Nathan would eagerly share what he'd learned. My mother, ever the peacemaker, helped bridge the awkward moments with her natural grace. The board members who had once scorned Nathan began to notice his transformation. His presentations, now backed by real understanding rather than bravado, carried weight. He wasn't trying to prove he deserved his name anymore. He was earning his place. 1 year after that morning at the lake house, I called Nathan into my office. The same office where I had once stripped him of everything he thought defined him. But this time the dynamic was different. The Shanghai expansion project needs a leader, I said, sliding a proposal across my desk. Someone who understands both our traditional strengths and our need for innovation. The board unanimously recommended you. He stared at the document, then back at me. This isn't pity, is it? You know me better than that now, I smiled. You earned this. Every presentation, every late night, every humble moment. You built this opportunity brick by brick. As he left my office, I thought about that first day when he'd looked down at me with contempt. We'd both changed since then. His arrogance had been replaced by earned confidence. My desire for revenge transformed into something more meaningful: leadership. That evening, as our family gathered for dinner, I watched Nathan interact with Ryan and my mother. The tension that had once defined our relationships had evolved into a comfortable understanding. We weren't just a merged family anymore. We were something stronger, survivors who had learned to build rather than destroy. 10 years ago, Nathan raised his glass in a toast. I told you you'd never be part of this family. I've never been more grateful to be proven wrong. The empire we now shared wasn't built on birthright or revenge. It was founded on something far more powerful: the ability to grow, to learn, and to forgive. In the end, that was the greatest victory of all. My gold-digging mother-in-law swiped my $850,000 inheritance in Dubai, cackling, "Just a nanny who trapped my son." I smirked. She didn't know about the hidden clause. Then her private jet crashed in the Alps. The bank called. Her fortune was already mine. Karma's a luxury, darling. The first time I met Ivy Hudson, she looked me up and down with eyes that could freeze Saharan sand. I stood in her immaculate living room, my hand extended, still warm from helping her son Hudson with his physical therapy. "So you're the nanny," she said, deliberately ignoring my outstretched hand. "Rather young, aren't you? And quite pretty." The way she said pretty made it sound like a crime. I lowered my hand slowly, forcing a professional smile. "I'm Lillian Moore. I'm actually Hudson's physical therapist, not his nanny. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Hudson." She circled me like a vulture assessing its next meal. "Well, I'm sure it is. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank each of you for being part of this incredible journey. If you're enjoying these stories of empowerment, consider subscribing. It's completely free and helps us build this amazing community. Let's dive in." That was 7 years ago, the beginning of what would become the most challenging relationship of my life. I was 26 then, fresh out of my residency, assigned to help 34-year-old Hudson recover from a skiing accident that had shattered his femur. I had no designs on her son's fortune. I wasn't even aware of the Hudson family wealth until my third session, when I noticed the original Monet hanging casually in his home gym. Hudson was different from his mother, kind, humble despite his privilege, with a self-deprecating humor that made our therapy sessions fly by. He joked about his ridiculous trust fund lifestyle, and seemed genuinely interested in my middle-class upbringing in Ohio. Our romance developed slowly, organically, over shared coffee after his sessions and long conversations about everything from classic films to childhood dreams. But to Ivy I was always the gold digger. The fortune hunter. The nobody who somehow enchanted her son. "You realize this is just a phase for him," she told me one evening, cornering me in Hudson's kitchen when he was taking a call in his office. "He's vulnerable right now. Dependent. When he's fully recovered, he'll see you for what you are." "And what am I, Mrs. Hudson?" I asked, my voice remarkably steady despite my racing heart. She smiled, all teeth and no warmth. A stepping stone, dear. A common girl reaching above her station. I didn't tell Hudson about these encounters. He adored his mother despite her flaws, and I didn't want to drive a wedge between them. I thought that with time she would see my genuine love for her son. I was naive. Our engagement announcement 6 months later sent Ivy into a barely concealed frenzy. She orchestrated a dinner at the Hudson estate that felt more like an inquisition, inviting family friends who, coincidentally, asked about my family background, education, and career aspirations. When I mentioned my parents were teachers, Ivy's smile tightened. "How quaint," she murmured into her wine glass. The wedding was a spectacle of excess that made me deeply uncomfortable. I wanted something small and meaningful. Ivy wanted, and ultimately orchestrated, a society event with 400 guests, most of whom were strangers to me. I walked down the aisle past faces that examined me with the same calculating assessment Ivy had mastered. During the reception, I overheard her speaking to an elegant older woman by the champagne fountain. The girl was his physical therapist, she was saying, her voice a theatrical whisper designed to carry. Practically a nanny, really. Caught him at his weakest. You know how these calculating types operate. But she seems lovely, Ivy, the woman replied, glancing my way. Oh, she's clever, I'll give her that. Hudson was always too trusting. Like his father. Ivy sipped her champagne. Just a nanny who trapped my son. I give it 3 years before the divorce, 5 if she gets pregnant first. I slipped away before they noticed me, finding Hudson on the dance floor. I held him tighter than usual that night. Everything okay? He asked, noticing the change in my demeanor. Perfect, I lied, resting my head against his chest. Just perfect. The first year of our marriage was a delicate balancing act. Hudson tried to foster peace between his mother and me, arranging Sunday brunches and holiday gatherings that inevitably devolved into Ivy's passive-aggressive commentary. I developed a thick skin, focusing instead on building our life together in the brownstone Hudson had purchased in a quieter part of the city, away from his mother's mansion. Then came the headaches. Hudson dismissed them at first, stress from work, he insisted. But when I found him disoriented in the kitchen one morning, unable to remember what day it was, I insisted on taking him to the hospital. The diagnosis was devastating. A rapidly growing brain tumor with a grim prognosis. Suddenly, Ivy and I were united by fear, orbiting Hudson's hospital room like planets around a dying sun. Our shared concern did nothing to warm her toward me. If anything, her hostility intensified. She questioned every medical decision, dismissed my right to participate in discussions with doctors, and implied repeatedly that my nursing background made me ill-equipped to understand Hudson's complex condition. "This is beyond your expertise," she'd say when I asked questions during the doctor's rounds. "Perhaps we should let those with actual medical degrees handle things." Hudson's decline was swift and merciless. Within 3 months he went from vibrant to bedridden. The specialists offered experimental treatments, all with minimal chances of success. Ivy pushed for every option, regardless of how it affected Hudson's quality of life. "He wouldn't want this," I told her quietly one night as Hudson slept, heavily sedated after a particularly aggressive treatment. "What would you know about what my son wants?" she hissed. "You've known him for minutes compared to my lifetime." I didn't argue. The truth was, Hudson had made his wishes clear to me in the privacy of our home, in the devastating conversations that followed his diagnosis. He didn't want extraordinary measures. He wanted dignity. Peace. He died on a Tuesday night in early autumn. I was holding his hand, reading from his favorite novel when his breathing changed. I knew before the monitors alarmed. Ivy had stepped out for coffee. By the time she returned, Hudson was gone. She looked at me, at her son, at the book in my lap, and something in her broke and reformed into pure rage. "You let him go," she accused, her voice low and dangerous. "You didn't call anyone. He didn't want. Get out." She pointed to the door. "Get out." The days following Hudson's death passed in a blur of funeral arrangements and legal meetings. Ivy took control of everything, relegating me to the role of grieving widow with no actual input. The funeral was as grandiose as our wedding had been, with the same society faces offering condolences that never quite reached their eyes. The reading of the will took place in the somber wood-paneled office of the Hudson family attorney. I sat across from Ivy, both of us hollow-eyed from grief and sleeplessness. When the attorney announced that Hudson had left me $850,000, a fraction of his wealth, but still a life-changing amount, Ivy's face contorted with fury. Impossible, she snapped. He would never leave that much too, she caught herself, but we all heard the unfinished sentiment. To the gold digger. To the nanny. To the woman who trapped her son. The attorney continued reading, detailing how the majority of Hudson's estate would go to his mother, with specific provisions for various charities. I didn't care about the money. I just wanted something of Hudson to keep, something that proved our love had been real, not the calculated scheme his mother had always believed it to be. As we left the attorney's office, Ivy brushed past me, pausing just long enough to whisper, "Enjoy your consolation prize. It's more than you deserve." I watched her walk to her waiting car, straight-backed and seemingly unbroken despite everything. I had no idea then that her dismissal of me would lead to her downfall, or that Hudson had foreseen his mother's true nature with far more clarity than I ever gave him credit for. 2 months after Hudson's funeral, my phone rang at 7:30 on a Sunday morning. I squinted at the screen, my heart jumping when I saw the caller ID. "Ivy." I answered, my voice still rough with sleep. "Lillian, darling," she chirped with a warmth I'd never heard before. "I hope I'm not calling too early." I sat up in bed, instantly wary. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine. Better than fine, actually." She paused dramatically. "I've been doing some reflecting since Hudson's passing. About us. About how he would want us to move forward." I remained silent, waiting for the catch. "I realize I've been difficult," she continued. "Grief makes monsters of us all, doesn't it? I'd like to make amends." Over the next 3 weeks, Ivy launched what could only be described as a charm offensive. Lunch invitations. Thoughtful gifts delivered to my door. Even a framed photo of Hudson I'd never seen before, taken during a sailing trip when he was in college. His smile was radiant, carefree, a treasure. "I don't understand," I confided to my sister over coffee. "It's like she's had a personality transplant." "Maybe she's realized life's too short for grudges," my sister suggested. I wasn't convinced. "This is Ivy we're talking about. The woman has held grudges since the Nixon administration." The invitation to Dubai came after a surprisingly pleasant dinner at her home. Ivy was flying there for a business conference and suddenly couldn't bear the thought of going alone. "Hudson always handled the international ventures," she explained, refilling my wine glass. "I could use a friendly face, someone to keep me company between meetings. Plus," she added with a conspiratorial smile, "Dubai's shopping is unparalleled. Consider it a girl's trip." Every instinct told me to decline. Yet something, curiosity perhaps, or a lingering desire to forge peace with my last connection to Hudson, made me say yes. Dubai was a gleaming monument to excess, all impossible skyscrapers and manufactured luxury rising from the desert. We stayed in a suite at the Burj Al Arab that was bigger than my entire apartment. Ivy was uncharacteristically generous, insisting I accompany her to designer boutiques where she purchased scarves and handbags for me with casual flicks of her platinum card. "Hudson would want you to have nice things," she insisted when I protested. The strangeness began on our 3rd day. Ivy had scheduled what she called boring financial meetings, and suggested I enjoy the hotel spa instead. "You'd be terribly bored, darling. All numbers and legal jargon," she said, waving me off. I might have believed her if I hadn't glimpsed the name on her calendar while she was showing me photos on her tablet. First Emirates Financial Trust, the same bank where Hudson had established my inheritance account. When she returned hours later, her smile seemed tighter, her generosity more calculated. Something had shifted. That night I couldn't sleep, a nagging unease keeping me awake. Around 3 a.m., I decided to check my inheritance account through the banking app on my phone, something I hadn't done since the funds were first transferred. The balance read $0. I refreshed the page thinking it was a glitch. Nothing changed. My heart hammered against my ribs as I navigated to the transaction history. A single transfer, authorized that very day. $850,000 to Ivy Hudson Enterprises. The room tilted around me. I gripped the edge of the bed, trying to steady my breathing. This was why we were in Dubai, far from our normal banks, in a financial system where Ivy had connections. This explained the sudden kindness, the gifts, the reconciliation campaign. It had all been a setup. Morning came with excruciating slowness, I dressed mechanically, my mind racing through options. We were scheduled to fly home the following day. I had limited funds of my own, my passport, and a growing sense of betrayal that threatened to choke me. Ivy was already sipping coffee on our suite's terrace when I emerged, her silk robe catching the early light. "Sleep well?" she asked pleasantly. "What did you do?" My voice was barely audible. She raised a perfectly groomed eyebrow. "I'm afraid you'll have to be more specific, dear." "The money. Hudson's inheritance to me. It's gone." Ivy took a leisurely sip of her coffee, studying me over the rim of her cup. "Oh, that. Yes, I've rectified a mistake." "A mistake?" I moved closer, my hands trembling. "That money was legally mine." "Was it?" She set her cup down carefully. "Hudson wasn't in his right mind toward the end. Brain tumors can cause such confusion, such poor judgment. The family attorney agrees that certain provisions of the will should be reviewed." "You're stealing from me." She laughed, then a sound like breaking glass. "Stealing implies taking something that rightfully belongs to someone else. That money is Hudson family money. It was never meant for temporary additions." "I was his wife," I said, my voice rising. "You were his caretaker who got a promotion." Ivy stood, dropping all pretense of civility. "Let's be honest, Lillian. You were just a nanny who trapped my son during his weakest moment. Did you really think I would allow you to walk away with Hudson's money?" Hot tears pricked behind my eyes, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing them fall. "This won't stand. I'll fight you." "With what resources?" She gestured broadly at our opulent surroundings. "This level of legal battle requires money, connections, influence, all things you conspicuously lack. Face it, dear. You had a good run, but the game is over." The mask had fallen completely now, revealing the ruthless adversary I'd always known lurked beneath Ivy's polished exterior. In that moment, I hated her with a purity that frightened me. "Hudson loved me," I said quietly. "That's what you could never accept." Something flashed in her eyes, pain perhaps, or a flicker of doubt quickly suppressed. "Love is a luxury for people who don't have legacies to protect. The Hudson name meant nothing to you beyond the bank account attached to it." I retreated to my room, hastily packing my belongings. There was no point staying another night in this gilded prison. I booked the first available flight home, depleting most of my savings in the process. Ivy didn't try to stop me. "Running home with your tail between your legs?" she called as I wheeled my suitcase toward the door. "Probably for the best. I have actual business to finish here." The journey home was a blur of sterile airports and cramped airplane seats, my mind cycling between shock, rage, and grief. I'd lost Hudson, and now I'd lost the financial security he'd wanted me to have. I felt hollowed out, defeated in a game I hadn't known we were playing. My apartment felt small and empty after the Dubai extravagance. I dropped my suitcase in the entryway and collapsed onto the couch, too exhausted even for tears. That's when I noticed the small stack of mail on my coffee table. My neighbor must have brought it in. Among the bills and flyers was a thick cream envelope with my name written in Hudson's distinctive handwriting. The postmark was dated 2 days after his death. He must have arranged for it to be sent in the event of his passing. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. "My dearest Lillian," it began. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're about to discover just how far my mother might go to protect what she considers hers." I sat motionless on my couch, Hudson's letter trembling in my hands as I read his final message to me. "My dearest Lillian, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're about to discover just how far my mother might go to protect what she considers hers. I hope I'm wrong. I hope she respects my wishes and treats you with the dignity you deserve. But I've known my mother all my life, and I've prepared for the possibility that she won't." My throat tightened as his voice seemed to materialize in our small living room, as clear as if he were sitting beside me. "There's a key taped to the back of the bottom drawer in my desk at home. It opens the floor safe in my study behind the Persian rug. Inside you'll find everything you need. Don't tell anyone about this letter until you've retrieved those documents. I love you, Lillian. More than you'll ever know. And I'm sorry I won't be there to protect you from what might come. But trust me when I say this. You are stronger than you realize, and I've made sure you won't face this alone." I drove to our brownstone, Hudson's brownstone, the next morning. I'd been avoiding the place since his death, unable to face the emptiness. Now stepping inside felt like walking into a time capsule. His scent still lingered faintly in the air, sandalwood and that particular laundry detergent he insisted on using despite its ridiculous cost. I moved through the quiet rooms like a ghost, trailing my fingers over furniture, remembering. In his study, I rolled back the antique Persian rug, revealing the hardwood floor beneath. The safe was exactly where he said it would be, its existence a complete surprise to me. The key turned with a satisfying click. Inside lay a sealed manila envelope with "contingency" written across it in Hudson's bold handwriting. Beneath that was a business card for someone named Edward Winters, with a handwritten note on the back. Call before opening the envelope. Edward Winters turned out to be an attorney I'd never met, not the Hudson family lawyer who had read the will, but someone Hudson had apparently trusted with his most sensitive matters. His office was modest, in a converted brownstone in a quieter part of the city, miles away from the gleaming downtown towers where Hudson had conducted his business affairs. "Mrs. Hudson," Edward greeted me, a slight man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "I've been expecting you. Hudson said you might come." "He prepared for this," I said, still processing the realization. He knew what his mother might do. Edward gestured to a chair. Hudson was many things, but naive wasn't one of them. He understood his mother's nature better than anyone. I placed the sealed envelope on his desk. "He told me to bring this to you before opening it." Edward nodded, his expression grave. "Before we proceed, I need to ask, has Ivy made any attempt to interfere with your inheritance?" My laugh was hollow. "Interfere? She's stolen it outright. Every penny. Lured me to Dubai and transferred it all to her company account while we were there." Something like satisfaction flickered across Edward's face. "Then what I'm about to show you becomes relevant." He reached for the envelope. Hey. Inside was a thick document, a secondary will and testament that I'd never seen before. Edward spread the pages carefully on his desk, pointing to specific sections as he explained. "Hudson created what we call a contingency clause. It's quite brilliant, actually. He left you what appeared to be a modest inheritance by Hudson standards. $850,000, I supplied. Exactly. A sum large enough to provide security but small enough that Ivy might view it as dispensable. A test, if you will." "A test." I leaned forward, confusion giving way to a dawning understanding. Hudson suspected that if his mother was going to make a move against you, she would target this inheritance first. So he created a trap in essence. Edward tapped a particularly dense paragraph of legal text. "This clause stipulates that if Ivy Hudson ever attempted to divert, withhold, or reclaim the initial inheritance left to you, a secondary provision would activate." My heart began to race. What provision? "The automatic transfer of 51% of Ivy Hudson Enterprises to you, along with controlling interest in the Hudson Family Trust." The room seemed to tilt. That would be approximately $65 million at current valuation, Edward finished quietly. Plus ongoing interest in all Hudson business ventures. I stood abruptly, needing to move. "This can't be legal." "She'll fight it." "She can try," Edward said, his confidence unwavering. But Hudson made certain this document would withstand any challenge. He had 5 years to perfect it after all. 5 years. I turned to him, stunned. "He's been planning this since before we were married?" Edward's expression softened. "Hudson came to me shortly after his accident, after he'd begun to see the tension between you and his mother. He said, 'My mother has spent a lifetime protecting the Hudson fortune from outsiders. I need to protect the woman I love from my mother.'" Tears sprang to my eyes, unexpected and hot. All this time, I'd thought I was shielding Hudson from the worst of Ivy's behavior, never realizing he'd seen everything, and had been quietly preparing a safety net I never knew I'd need. "There's something else you should know," Edward continued. "This clause doesn't activate automatically. There are specific conditions." He explained the intricate legal framework Hudson had designed. The transfer of assets wouldn't happen immediately. There would need to be documented proof of Ivy's interference, certified by an independent financial investigator. The process could take months. "So what do I do now?" I asked when he finished. "Nothing," Edward said simply. "That's the beauty of Hudson's plan. We wait. We document. We prepare the case methodically. Ivy believes she's won, which means she'll grow confident, perhaps careless. You want me to just let her think she's gotten away with it? The idea tasted bitter. Precisely. Edward gathered the papers carefully. Any confrontation now would only alert her, give her time to cover her tracks or find a legal workaround. Patience is your greatest weapon, Mrs. Hudson. Patience. The very thought of allowing Ivy to believe she'd succeeded in erasing my last connection to Hudson made my skin crawl. But looking at the meticulously prepared documents before me, I recognized the wisdom in Hudson's strategy. He had known his mother would act exactly as she had, and he had prepared a response that would be devastating in its completeness. I left Edward's office with copies of all the documents and a strange, contradictory feeling in my chest. Grief for the husband I'd lost, amazement at his foresight, and something new, a quiet, simmering satisfaction at the thought of justice waiting in the wings. The months that followed were an exercise in self-restraint. I returned to work at the physical therapy clinic, taking comfort in the simple act of helping others heal. I moved to a smaller apartment, sold my car for something more economical, and lived frugally, all while knowing that a fortune potentially awaited me. The contrast was sometimes surreal. Ivy returned from Dubai triumphant, making no attempt to contact me. Occasionally I'd spot her in society pages, draped in designer clothes at charity galas, the picture of wealthy widowhood. Each photograph strengthened my resolve to see Hudson's plan through. Edward called regularly with updates. Financial investigators were documenting the paper trail from Dubai. Legal experts were preparing the case that would eventually trigger the contingency clause. How much longer? I asked during one such call 6 months after discovering the secret will. These things take time, Edward counseled. But we're getting close. The evidence is overwhelming. I hung up and gazed out my window at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Ivy Hudson was living her life, believing she had won our silent war. She had no idea what was coming, what Hudson had set in motion from beyond the grave. For now, that knowledge was enough. I could wait. Hudson had taught me that justice doesn't always arrive on our preferred timeline, but it arrives nonetheless. That night I dreamed of Hudson. Not sick and fading in a hospital bed, but vibrant and laughing as he had been when we first met. In the dream he simply nodded at me as if to say, "Watch. Just watch what happens next." Nearly 8 months had passed since my discovery of Hudson's contingency plan. Winter had given way to spring, then summer, and now the crisp edge of autumn had returned. A full year since Hudson's death. Through it all, Edward and his team had worked methodically, building our case against Ivy with the thoroughness of master architects. "We're filing the formal complaint next week," Edward told me during our regular Tuesday call. "Once we do, Ivy will receive formal notice. You should prepare yourself for her reaction." I had just finished with my last patient of the day, a college athlete recovering from ACL surgery. "I'm ready," I assured him, though the thought of facing Ivy's wrath still sent a flutter of anxiety through my chest. That evening I settled onto my couch with a glass of wine and turned on the evening news. A habit I'd developed during Hudson's illness and never quite abandoned. The familiar drone of the anchor's voice was oddly comforting as I scrolled through emails on my phone. Breaking news from Europe. The anchor announced suddenly, his tone shifting to the practiced gravity reserved for disasters. A private jet has reportedly gone down while crossing the Swiss Alps. Early reports indicate the aircraft belonged to American business magnate Ivy Hudson, CEO of Hudson Enterprises. The wine glass slipped from my fingers, spilling across my coffee table. I scrambled for the remote, turning up the volume. En route from Geneva to Milan when contact was lost approximately 40 minutes into the flight. Swiss rescue teams have been dispatched to the location of the last radar contact, but officials warn that the mountainous terrain and deteriorating weather conditions may hamper search efforts. My phone rang. Edward's name flashed on the screen. "Are you watching the news?" he asked without preamble. "Yes," I managed, my voice barely audible. "Is it true? Is it really her plane?" "Confirmed. She was heading to a luxury goods conference in Milan." He paused. "Lillian, I need to ask, did you tell anyone about our case? About what we've been building?" The implication hit me like a slap. "You think I had something to do with this?" "No," he said quickly. "Absolutely not. But we need to be prepared for questions. This timing, it's unfortunate." Unfortunate. Such a bland word for what was unfolding. I hung up and sat in stunned silence, watching as news helicopters captured distant footage of smoke rising from a jagged alpine peak. The surreal quality of the moment was overwhelming. Ivy, the indomitable force that had shaped so much of my life since meeting Hudson, might simply be gone. The confirmation came in the early hours of the morning. No survivors. The news showed grainy photos of the wreckage scattered across a snow-dusted mountainside. I stared at the images, waiting to feel something, anything, definitive. Instead, I experienced a confusing tumult of emotions. Shock, a hollow sense of loss, and underneath it all, a whisper I didn't want to acknowledge. Justice. That whisper frightened me. Was I really the kind of person who could feel vindication at another human's death? Even someone who had caused me so much pain? The following days unfolded in a blur of media coverage and phone calls. The investigation began immediately, with early reports suggesting mechanical failure. Ivy's assistant reached out, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion, to inform me of the funeral arrangements. It would be held at St. Andrew's Cathedral, the same church where Hudson and I had married. 3 days after the crash, as I was preparing dinner in my small kitchen, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Mrs. Hudson? This is Marcus Brennan from First National Trust." The voice was professionally somber. "First, please accept my condolences on the passing of your mother-in-law." "Thank you," I replied automatically, though the words mother-in-law seemed an insufficient label for what Ivy had been to me. "I'm calling regarding some significant account activity that requires your attention. You see, we've received documentation triggering what appears to be an automatic transfer of assets from the late Mrs. Hudson's holdings to accounts newly established in your name." My knife paused over the half-chopped onion. "I'm sorry. Yes, we were quite surprised ourselves. According to our records, the transfer was initiated by pre-existing legal instructions tied to, let me see, a contingency clause in an auxiliary will filed by your late husband Hudson Baldwin Hudson III. The contingency clause." I leaned against the counter for support. How much are we talking about?" The figure he named made me sink to the floor, the phone clutched to my ear. Hudson's plan had been activated, not by our legal case which had never been filed but by Ivy's death. The timing was so impeccable it seemed orchestrated by some cosmic playwright with a dark sense of irony. That evening, a detailed email arrived from Edward, explaining what had happened. Hudson's contingency clause had included a secondary trigger. In the event of Ivy's death before our case was settled, all contested assets would automatically transfer to me. It was a standard legal protection he'd included, never imagining it would be the primary mechanism through which the clause would activate. "The preliminary investigation reports are clear," Edward wrote. "Mechanical failure in the left engine followed by a catastrophic system breakdown. The maintenance logs show corner cutting on inspections. Ivy's decision apparently to save costs. There's absolutely nothing connecting this to our case, which I should note we never formally filed." I read those words repeatedly, seeking the reassurance they offered. This wasn't my doing. This wasn't even Hudson's doing, really. Ivy's own choices, her cost-cutting, her decisions had led to this outcome. There was a bitter poetry to it that I couldn't fully process. The day of the funeral arrived with unseasonable warmth, the late September sun casting long shadows across the cathedral steps. I arrived early, dressed in a simple black dress that Hudson had always liked. The church filled quickly with New York's elite, politicians, celebrities, business magnates, all come to pay respects to a woman many had feared rather than loved. I sat in the front row, where the funeral director had awkwardly but firmly placed me as Ivy's only remaining family. Throughout the service I felt the weight of stares boring into my back, heard the hushed whispers behind cupped hands. "That's the daughter-in-law." Heard everything's been left to her. Suspicious timing, don't you think? At the graveside, a tall woman in an impeccable suit approached me. "Helen Blackwood," she introduced herself. I was Ivy's oldest friend. Her gaze was calculating. "Quite a reversal of fortune for you, isn't it? 1 minute, a physical therapist living in a rental apartment. The next, one of the wealthiest women in the city." I met her eyes steadily. "Fortune is a strange thing, Ms. Blackwood. It reverses for all of us eventually." "Indeed." She studied me as if trying to solve a puzzle. You know, Ivy always said her son didn't know what he was doing when he married you. Perhaps she was wrong about that, and much else. She moved away, leaving me alone by the fresh grave. I placed a single white rose atop the gleaming casket. "Goodbye, Ivy," I whispered, feeling neither triumph nor hatred, just the quiet certainty that Hudson had been right all along. Justice finds its own path, its own time. As I turned to leave, I noticed Edward waiting respectfully at a distance. The crowd of mourners parted before me, their curious gazes following my every move. I walked toward my future with my head high, carrying the weight of Hudson's final gift. Not just the wealth, but the reminder that love protects in ways we cannot always foresee. Edward approached me as I walked away from Ivy's grave, offering his arm in a gentlemanly gesture that reminded me of Hudson. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly as we navigated the cemetery's winding path, trailed by curious glances from the funeral attendees. "I'm not sure what I am," I admitted. Everything's happened so fast. 2 weeks after the funeral, I found myself sitting in the echoing great room of the Hudson mansion. My mansion now, according to the paperwork Edward's firm had processed with astonishing efficiency. $65 million. Controlling interest in Hudson Enterprises. Properties in 5 countries. The full extent of the fortune was still being catalogued by a team of accountants who spoke to me in deferential tones that made my skin crawl. I wandered through the cavernous rooms like a tourist in someone else's life. Though I'd visited this house many times with Hudson, I'd never spent a night here. Now the staff asked me about dinner preferences and which bedroom I wanted prepared. The absurdity of it all hit me as I stood in Ivy's enormous closet, larger than my entire apartment, filled with designer clothes that still carried the fainty scent of her perfume. What am I supposed to do with all this? I whispered to the empty room. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat on the terrace overlooking the manicured gardens, wrapped in Hudson's old cardigan that I'd brought from our brownstone. The wealth surrounding me felt tainted, not just by Ivy's hostility toward me, but by the uncomfortable reality that I had benefited from her death. The cosmic justice of it all didn't erase the fact that a human life had ended. By morning I'd made my first decision as the new head of the Hudson fortune. I wouldn't live in this mausoleum of painful memories. "I want to sell it," I told Edward over coffee in the sunny breakfast room. "The house, the art, the furnishings, all of it." He paused, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "That's certainly your prerogative. But there's significant historical value in many of the pieces Ivy collected. The Hudson name is attached to donations in several museums. There would be social implications." "I'm already facing those implications," I pointed out. "Half of New York society thinks I somehow orchestrated Ivy's death to get her money." Edward didn't argue with this assessment. "What would you do with the proceeds?" The question crystallized something that had been forming in my mind since reading Hudson's letter all those months ago. "I want to establish a foundation. Something that would help ordinary people, people like me before all this, who find themselves in battles they can't afford to fight." Edward's eyes lit up with genuine interest. "Legal aid." More than that. The idea was taking shape as I spoke. Financial advocacy. Legal protection. Education about rights and options. All the things I didn't have when Ivy stole my inheritance. Over the next month, the Hudson mansion was systematically dismantled. Auction houses competed for the opportunity to sell the renowned Hudson collection. The proceeds from the art alone were staggering. I kept only a few pieces that had been special to Hudson. A small hopper that had hung in his study, a sculpture we'd bought together during our honeymoon in Santa Fe. I moved back to our brownstone, the one place that still felt like home. There, surrounded by memories of our brief happiness, I began to plan the Hudson Justice Foundation with Edward's guidance and the help of experts in nonprofit management. "You'll need a board of directors," advised Meredith Chin, a nonprofit consultant Edward had introduced me to. People with expertise, connections, and shared values. Finding those people meant reconnecting with the world I'd inhabited before marrying into the Hudson dynasty. My fellow physical therapists, Hudson's doctors, community advocates I'd volunteered with during college. People who had known me as Lillian Moore, not as a Hudson or an heiress. Dr. Samantha Wells, Hudson's oncologist, was the first to accept my invitation to join the board. "Hudson would have loved this," she told me over lunch at a small cafe near the hospital. "He always said you saw people, really saw them, in a way his mother never could. Marcus Taylor, my former supervisor at the rehab center, initially declined. "I don't know anything about foundations or millions of dollars," he protested. "That's exactly why I need you," I countered. "This foundation isn't about wealthy people deciding what others need. It's about making justice accessible to everyone." He joined the following week. 6 months after Ivy's funeral, the Hudson Justice Foundation officially launched. Our first initiative focused on helping medical patients facing financial exploitation during their most vulnerable moments. The work consumed me in the best possible way, giving purpose to wealth I had never sought. "You're making waves," Edward informed me during one of our regular strategy meetings. "Several of Ivy's old associates have expressed concerns about the Foundation's mission." "Good," I replied, surprising myself with my lack of apprehension. "Maybe they should be concerned." As the foundation grew, I gradually sold off the more extravagant symbols of Hudson wealth. The penthouse in Paris, the yacht in Monaco, the private island off Belize. Each sale channeled more resources into programs that helped people stand up to corporate giants and wealthy adversaries. 1 year to the day after Ivy's funeral, I finalized the sale of her prized possession, the private jet she had replaced just months before her fatal crash. The buyer, a tech billionaire with a reputation for ostentation, seemed puzzled by my lack of sentimentality about the aircraft. "Most people in your position wouldn't part with a jet like this," he remarked as we completed the transaction. "I'm finding I'm not most people," I replied. That evening I walked through our brownstone, now truly mine in spirit as well as deed. I'd kept it much as it had been when Hudson was alive, with a few changes that made it more completely ours rather than just his. My physical therapy books shared shelf space with his first editions. My grandmother's quilt draped across the foot of our bed. On Hudson's birthday, I visited his grave bringing sunflowers, his favorite. The simple headstone we'd chosen together during his final weeks stood in stark contrast to the ornate Hudson family monument where Ivy now rested. "You were right," I told him, settling onto the grass beside his grave. "About so many things. About your mother. About what matters in the end." The autumn breeze rustled the trees overhead, sending a shower of golden leaves spiraling down around me. I thought about the path that had led me here, from a middle-class girl from Ohio to a wealthy widow to whatever I was becoming now. The journey had transformed me in ways I never could have anticipated. The golden cage that Ivy had perceived around the Hudson fortune. The notion that wealth must be hoarded, protected from outsiders, preserved at all costs, had been her prison, not mine. In trying to lock me out, she had ultimately locked herself in, living and dying by the cold metrics of financial worth rather than human connection. As I walked back to my car, phone buzzing with updates from the foundation team, I realized that Hudson's true legacy wasn't the money he'd left me or even the clever legal trap he'd set. It was the understanding that freedom comes not from what you possess, but from what possesses you. I had wealth now, yes, but it didn't define me. It was simply a tool like the therapeutic techniques I'd once used to help patients heal. And like those techniques, its value lay entirely in how it was applied. "Karma's a luxury, darling," Ivy had once said dismissively during one of our tense early encounters. She'd meant it as a cutting remark, that justice was a fantasy poor people clung to while the wealthy made their own rules. She hadn't lived long enough to learn how wrong she was. But I had, and that knowledge was the greatest inheritance of all.